Chapter 184. The three of them were silent for a while. Issa was lively and smart. He noticed the awkwardness between Bay and Fezan, so he smiled and said, "Lin Shitty, how did you get here?" Bay was not familiar with Issa, but first of all, seeing someone from the same faction in this strange place, he felt a bit close to him. Second of all, he knew Issa and Shah Danan were good friends, so he had a good impression of him. He nodded. "Just now in a miasma, I was separated from my Shixiangs. I rushed all the way and managed to get out. I landed not far from here. Then I saw an Esper flashing here, so I came here to take a look." Issa laughed, wiped the rain off his face, said, "Seems like we were brought together by fate. In this dangerous place, it is better to have more people. Am I right, Fezan Shixiang?" Fezan smiled, nodded. "That's right. The rain stopped." Issa and Bay were startled. They looked up at the sky, and sure enough, the rain that had been falling nonstop just now had actually started to lessen. The sky was gradually brightening. Even the sky seemed to have widened a little. Bay took a deep breath. The air in the forest after the rain was very fresh, with a hint of sweetness that seeped into the bottom of his heart. Fezan turned around and looked at the closed strange flower, said, "This place is very strange. This strange flower is not kind. We should not stay here for long. We should leave this place first." Bay did not say anything. Issa smiled. "Fezan Shixiang is right. Let's go." As he spoke, he turned to look at Lin Jingyu. Lin Jingyu nodded silently. Immediately the three of them tidied up, drove their magical weapons, and soared into the sky. Zhang Shushu pondered for a moment in the air, loudly said to the two of them, "Feixiang senior brother, Lin junior brother, this forest is astonishingly big. Poisonous insects, strange beasts, and all kinds of ferocious creatures are innumerable. I'm afraid the legendary rare treasure is in the depths of this forest. What should we do next?" Bei said excitedly, "Zhang Shixiang, how can we get Tiger Cub without entering the tiger's den?" Zhang Shushu glanced at him, and then turned to Feixiang. Feixiang smiled and put his palms together. Apparently he did not have any objections. He smiled and said, "That's good too. Let's explore this savage and evil place. What kind of rare treasures are born?" The three of them became spirited and activated their magic treasures. They turned into three beams of light and continued to fly into the depths of the forest. The curtain of night gradually fell, and the sky had completely darkened. Lin Jingyu and the other two searched for half a day, but to no avail. Not even a shadow of that legendary rare treasure was seen. Not only that, but in this strange forest, they had seen a lot of strange beasts and poisonous insects. Some of them were unimaginable. Sometimes when they flew past a big tree in midair, a withered branch on the tree suddenly turned into a gray poisonous insect, opened its mouth, and bit over. Although the three of them relied on their own outstanding cultivation and were all outstanding talents in their respective sects, they couldn't help but be secretly shocked as they passed through this series of events. The night was getting darker. The three of them discussed for a while and happened to find a big rock in the forest. It looked flat, and the three of them landed on it to rest. Zhang Shushu cautiously walked to the side and stayed alert. At the same time, he wielded his magic weapon, the Xinyuan sword. Against the dim light, he carefully picked and picked. Finally, he picked some relatively dry branches and prepared to start a fire. Bei watched from aside. Suddenly, he could not help but gave a bitter laugh. Issa heard it and looked at him. He knew what he was thinking. He could not help but also laughed out. In the 2,000 years since Qing Yun sect was established, the one who picked firewood the most carefully would be Issa today. Turning back, Issa took out a fire starter, but the heavy rain in the day had dampened the firewood. After half a day, a lot of thick smoke came out. Then the fire was lit. Feixiang looked around, saw that the forest was shrouded in darkness. After hesitating for a moment, he signaled to Bei and Zhang Shushu, signaling them to sit closer together. Then took a deep breath. His mouth slowly chanted. The magical weapon, Reincarnation Pearl, slowly appeared in his hand. A moment later, a gentle golden light flashed, expanded out, and formed a 6 chi radius golden halo, enveloping the three of them within. In the night, the three of their faces under the gentle light of the Reincarnation Pearl reflected a faint golden color. Lin Jingyu and Zheng Shushu were both from prestigious sects. Naturally, they could see clearly Fa Xiang's skill, although Lin Jingyu had a grudge against him, but like Zheng Shushu, immediately they revealed a look of admiration. Zheng Shushu smiled and said, Fa Xiang's senior brother, good power, respect, respect. Fa Xiang smiled and said, there are too many poisonous insects here. I'm afraid this small firelight is not enough to defend. With this Prajna heart circle, tonight we don't have to worry about these ordinary poisonous insects. After speaking, he smiled faintly at the two of them. His eyes intentionally or unintentionally glanced at Lin Jingyu. Lin Jingyu glanced at him, slowly lowered his head, and did not say anything. Fa Xiang slowly shifted his gaze back, looked at that small fire in the middle of the three of them. The firelight reflected in his eyes, not knowing what he was thinking in his heart. The atmosphere gradually quieted down. The three of them did not speak again. They could only hear the deep night around them. In the heavy darkness, the wind suddenly started to blow. The sound of the wind was like a whimper, like a heartbroken girl crying alone. It gently drifted in the forest. It swept past the treetops and brushed past the leaves. The entire dark forest, in this pitch-black night, suddenly seemed to come to life, as if it had opened its chest, allowing its descendants to freely and actively sing in its boundless expanse of chest. The night deepened. The wind blew past the treetops. The firelight wavered. Fa Xiang closed his eyes and meditated. Issa seemed to be tired too. He lay beside the fire. He seemed to have fallen asleep. Only Bei was still sitting on the other side of the fire. He did not feel sleepy. His eyes were bright. He stared blankly at the burning fire. Slowly, he stretched out his hand and took a branch. With a sound, it broke into two and gently threw it into the fire. The fire slowly swallowed the branch. It looked more vigorous. Bei suddenly felt something. He looked to the side. Fa Xiang had opened his eyes. Lin, junior brother. As if concerned about the sleeping Issa, Fa Xiang lowered his voice. Why aren't you resting? Fa Xiang looked away. He looked at the fire again. After a while, he faintly said, Master, aren't you also not sleeping? Fa Xiang said, Little monk has always meditated and rest. It has become a habit. But Lin, junior brother, you are still young. You should rest more. Fa Xiang was silent. After a long while, he suddenly said, These 10 years, I seldom sleep. Fa Xiang frowned. He felt strange. What is it? The fire in front of him was reflected in Bei's eyes. It flashed. He slowly said, Whenever I close my eyes, I will think of the innocent villagers who died tragically. I will think of Xiaofan brother, who has unfortunately fallen into the evil way. Pop! A crisp sound reverberated in the deep night. Bei broke the branch in his hand again and slowly threw it into the fire. The night was dark. The forest in the darkness seemed to be roaring in the distant silence. Fa Xiang quietly looked at Bei, that young man beside the weak fire. His figure seemed lonely, but so stubborn. After a long while, he looked away. He looked at the reincarnation pearl floating in the air in front of him. He suddenly said, You still miss Zhang Xiaofan? Bei did not answer. He looked at Fa Xiang with his cold eyes. Fa Xiang's eyes had a faint pain, but his voice was still relatively calm. Unhurriedly said, These 10 years, he joined the evil sect Ghost King sect and is now already the vice sect leader position of Ghost King sect. Everyone in the world knows that sooner or later he will be the next Ghost King sect leader. He slowly turned his head. He met Bei's eyes. The corner of his eyes seemed to twitch, but he still continued. These 10 years, he killed people like flies. Killing is second nature to him. Even the evil sect people called him Shuegongzi. He is regarded as a great calamity by the entire good faction. Enough! Bei suddenly shouted. He clenched his teeth. His hands clenched into fists. Veins could be seen indistinctly. Fa Xiang stared at him, but he still continued. If one day you face him, what will you do? The night turned cold. It was as if the entire heaven and earth were cold and emotionless. Bei's handsome face was gently reflected by the fire. He slowly closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He is my brother. After an unknown amount of time, Amidst the silence, Lin Jingyu suddenly spoke like that, resolute and decisive, without the slightest hesitation. Fa Xiang looked at him and did not speak. Bei slowly lowered his head. His voice also became deeper. I know. He has already sunk into the evil faction. There is no way to turn back. When I meet him again in the future, most likely it will be an irreconcilable enemy. Pa. He broke the third branch. He slowly placed it into the fire. He quietly said, just that whether we fight to the death or to be irreconcilable enemies, I don't care what you good faction seniors think. In my heart, even if the good and evil faction are irreconcilable enemies, sooner or later we will have a battle. No matter if he wants to kill me or I want to kill him, I will still treat him as my brother. He smiled. With some bitterness and determination, he faintly said, he is my only brother in this lifetime. Nobody spoke. The ancient forest became quieter. In the cold wind, there seemed to be someone in the treetops. In the distant horizon, quietly sighing. Chapter 185. Zheng Shushu suddenly opened his eyes, flipped over, and sat up, his brows tightly furrowed, as if he was concentrating on listening to something, which instead gave Fa Xiang and Lin Jingyu a fright. Lin Jingyu said in surprise, Zheng senior brother, what is it? Zheng Shushu's face was solemn, said, something is not right. All of you listen. Fa Xiang and Lin Jingyu were shocked. They were deep in their conversation and for a moment did not notice the movements around them. Right now, they quickly looked around and concentrated on listening. In the forest, other than the whistling sound of the wind, it seemed to be a stretch of silence. There was no movement at all. But after a moment, they frowned at the same time. Far away, a light but closely packed rustling sound was heard, like hundreds of insects crawling in the night, although they could not see clearly through the darkness, and that sound seemed to be very far away. But this kind of fine sound made one's hair stand on end. The three of them looked uncertain. Lin Jingyu frowned and said, don't tell me it is some poisonous insects again? Zheng Shushu forced a smile and said, I'm afraid the number is not small. The three of them glanced at each other and saw the worry in each other's eyes. In this death marsh that was filled with poisonous insects and unpredictable dangers, after just one day, they had already become wary of the ferocious creatures in this place. Moreover, there were too many different kinds of strange creatures in this place. They really did not know what would appear again. Just when the three of them were concentrating and guarding, far away in the forest ahead, suddenly a loud noise was heard. A moment later, an angry shout mixed with the cries of the insects was heard. Lin Jingyu and the rest were stunned. Zheng Shushu was the first to shout out, it is Funxiang Valley Li Sun's senior brother. Lin Jingyu's expression shook, quickly said, Li senior brother might be in danger. I will go out to assist. He was about to move when suddenly a hand stretched out from beside and pulled him down. It was Fa Xiang. He was heard quickly saying, I will go. This place is extremely dangerous. Both of you stay in this Prajna heart circle. Do not move easily. As he spoke, he did not wait for Bei and Zheng Shushu's objection. His body floated. The moon-white monk's robe carried his body up into the air. A moment later, his figure disappeared into the darkness ahead. Both Lin Jingyu and Zheng Shushu were taken aback, but after a short while, the noises in front of them erupted again, angry shouts incessantly, insect cries filling the air. Mixed with a few bewildered voices, it was obvious that Fa Xiang had already reached Li Sun's vicinity and engaged with those unknown monsters. Deep into the night, the chilly night wind in the forest suddenly seemed to become stronger, the sound mournful. The noise in front grew louder and louder, but the darkness was like an insurmountable high, blocking in front of Zheng Shushu and Lin Jingyu. It sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves. Just when Lin Jingyu and Zheng Shushu could not hold it in any longer and prepare to break out, suddenly a sharp whistle was heard ahead. Instantly the insect cries died down. Human figures flashed in the darkness. Two figures floated back at the same time. It was Fa Xiang and Funxiang Valley Li Sun. Both of their clothes were torn in places. Li Sun's body even had faint traces of blood. Their movements were extremely fast. In a short while, they had already floated back into this glittering golden circle. Lin Jingyu and Zheng Shushu hurriedly went forward to receive them, but saw that both of their faces looked tired. Without waiting for Lin Jingyu and the rest to ask, Li Sun's sword-like brows moved, suddenly shouted, "Careful!" Everyone was shocked again, but in the surrounding darkness of the forest, suddenly the sound of insects was heard, from all directions, densely packed, surrounding them in the middle, not knowing how many strange and terrifying eyes, emitting faint light, peeped at them in the darkness. "What is it?" Zheng Shushu opened his eyes wide, looked around, at the same time asked Fa Xiong and Li Sun. Li Sun's face was cold, said, "There are many huge ants. Everyone be careful." Lin Jingyu and Zheng Shushu were stunned. Zheng Shushu curiously asked, "What is it?" At this moment, Fa Xiong suddenly softly said, "Careful, it's coming." Everyone was shocked, quickly focused, and took precautions. Under the illumination of the fire and the reincarnation pearl's golden light, from the surrounding deep forest darkness, rustling sounds were heard. Gradually black shadows swarmed over, surrounding them from all directions. When they came closer, Lin Jingyu and the rest took a closer look. Immediately they all inhaled a breath of cold air. The monsters that kept crawling out from the darkness, they were all ant-like monsters, but each of them was the size of a human's calf, and their numbers seemed endless. Instantly the creepy rustling sounds filled the empty space in the forest. Even though Zheng Shushu and the rest were highly skilled, right now their faces also turned pale, but those huge ants, not knowing if it was because of Fa Xiong's Prajna heart circle or the fire burning in the middle. Although they came closer, but they only surrounded half a zhang away and did not come near. But the number of huge ants that swarmed out from the darkness increased. Most likely there were at least tens of thousands of them. The black shadows, the four of them all turned pale. The sound of the wind was mournful, sweeping past this ancient forest, as if mocking these stupid humans, disturbing the eternal peace here. In that distant sound of the wind, there seemed to be a faint flute sound, drifting with the wind. Li Xiong's countenance changed again, suddenly raised his voice and shouted, "Which evil sect evildoer, pretending to be mysterious here?" His shout was not small. In an instant even the sound of the wind seemed to stop temporarily. This time not only Zheng Shushu and Lin Jingyu, even Fa Xiong was shocked. When he went out to receive Li Xiong, he only saw countless of huge ants and did not discover any evil sect people. Immediately he asked, "What, these huge ants are the evil sect evildoers doing?" Li Xiong snorted, his eyes sharp, looked around and said, "That's right, at night, I suddenly met a strange man nearby. After asking, that person immediately turned hostile and attacked, using the evil sect's evil skills. As for these monsters, I don't know what kind of crooked way that guy used. He could actually control such ferocious beasts." Li Xiong had not finished his words. Suddenly someone in the darkness laughed lightly and said, "This good faction hero's words are really logical, but I remember that it was you who attacked me first." The voice was a man's voice. It sounded like he was not old, but the voice was erratic. For a moment, it was hard to tell where he was. Li Xiong's countenance changed. In such a disadvantageous situation, he did not have a trace of fear. Loudly said, "Since you're the evil sect evildoer, naturally I have to subdue the evil. If you are a man, then stand out. We will duel for 300 rounds. Using these ignorant beasts, what kind of hero are you?" That man suddenly laughed, indifferently said, "Heroes are for you good faction heroes. It is not my turn." As he spoke, the sound of a flute faintly rang out. The giant ants suddenly parted, opening up a path. A young man slowly walked out from the darkness and stood outside the golden Prajna heart circle. He stood there with a smile on his face, his bearing elegant. It was one Du Clan Qin Wuyen. Fa Xiong's face was grim, carefully assessed him, suddenly said, "Young age, unfathomable skills, and able to control thousands of poisonous insects. Don't tell me you are one Du Clan Qin Wuyen Gongzi known as Du Gongzi." Qin Wuyen frowned, turned and looked at Fa Xiong carefully, suddenly smiled and said, "So is Tian Yin Temple Fa Xiong master. No wonder your eyes are like torches. I am indeed Qin Wuyen." Speaking till here, he paused for a moment, leisurely said, "It is said that among the young disciples of the good factions, 3 great sects, Tian Yin Temple Fa Xiong master is publicly acknowledged to be the most outstanding, highly intelligent and virtuous. After meeting today, It is indeed a well-deserved reputation. Qin Huiyin pays his respects here. After speaking, he nodded slightly, a smile on his face. Fa Xiang frowned. Almost at the same time, he heard Li Xiang snorted softly. His heart turned cold. Qin Huiyin's face hung a smile, but his mind was racing, different from the others. He was from evil sect Wandu clan, entering this innumerable ferocious beasts and poisonous insects in the inner marsh. Others viewed it as a dangerous path, but to him, it was like entering a treasure mountain. He was extremely delighted. Highly poisonous things that could only be chanced upon by luck and not sought after were actually everywhere at this moment. Moreover, there were even countless strange poisonous insects that he'd never heard of in the past. In the eyes of a poison expert like him, they were simply 10 times more precious than a myriad of gold and silver. Wandu clan and the evil sect had always been a maverick, although their cultivation methods and the other sects were all derived from Tianshu, but what they inherited and passed down was actually a miraculous cultivation method supplemented with various kinds of strange poisons to enhance their cultivation. Therefore, for several hundred years, the group of highly skilled martial artists who came out from this sect were often great experts in using poison. And to be able to find the strongest and most poisonous things to Wandu clan members, the help in their cultivation was immeasurable. Qin Huiyin was the current Wandu clan head god of poison's last disciple. His innate talent was extremely high and in the way of using poison. After entering this inner marsh, once he saw the scene, he was immediately pleasantly surprised, and for the past few days, he had collected many poisonous things and even encountered the unique poisonous giant ants in this death marsh. Qin Huiyin tried using Wandu clan's demon control flute. Perhaps the evil sect's Tian Shu indeed contained the unfathomable good fortune of heaven and earth. This kind of savage, ferocious creature was actually successfully controlled by Qin Huiyin using the skill passed down from Tian Shu. While Qin Huiyin was overjoyed, he suddenly met Funxiang Valley Li Sun, who landed nearby. Both of them did not get along and fought. Qin Huiyin straightforwardly summoned these innumerable death marsh giant ants. Although Li Sun's skills were high, but being surrounded by these innumerable giant ants, immediately he could only defend. If not for Fa Xiang's timely arrival, he would have suffered a great loss. Just at the current situation, together with Fa Xiang, Zheng Shu, and Lin Jingyu, Li Sun, the 4 of them, were trapped by this young but extremely skilled Qin Huiyin. Chapter 186. Qin Huiyin's gaze turned, looked at the 4 of them one by one. With his foresight, naturally he could tell that these 4 were outstanding talents. If he were to rely on his real skills, most likely he would not be able to gain any advantage in front of the 4 of them. Just that Wandu clan had always been unconventional in their cultivation. Many strange skills, or should it be said evil and crooked ways. Qin Huiyin right now was controlling this huge pile of death marsh giant ants, and in addition to the numerous poisonous creatures on him. He was not afraid at all. Instead, his expression was as usual. Looking at this scene, it seemed that he still had the upper hand. Zheng Shu had always been quick-witted, but right now he couldn't help but feel a headache, looking at the swarm of sinister-looking death marsh giant ants. The pungent stench hit him in the face. He quietly said to the 3 beside him, "What do we do now? Do we leave or fight?" Li Sun frowned, but did not speak. Actually, with his usual character, he would definitely not retreat at this moment. It was just that in the fierce battle with the death marsh giant ants, although with his own strength he had killed hundreds of giant ants, but this endless swarm of monsters swarming up together, that terrifying power still left him with a lingering fear. Fa Xiang pondered and did not speak. Lin Jingyu suddenly spoke. "I think we can fight. I think these death marsh giant ants are definitely not reared by someone, but controlled by this evil sect sorcerer using some kind of sorcery. As long as we can hold this person back, we can win in one battle." Fa Xiang nodded his head and said, "Lin Jr. brother is right. Both of you," Zheng Shu thought for a moment, said, "Lin Jr. brother is right, and with the 4 of us facing him alone, if we still flee, it would be too embarrassing." Following which the 3 of them looked at Li Sun. Li Sun was Funxiang Valley's most outstanding talent in recent years, and had always been arrogant. If not for Qin Huiyin summoning innumerable giant ant from who knows where, he would be the first to fight with Qin Huiyin. Right now, facing the other 3's gazes, how could he afford to lose face? Naturally, he also resolutely said, "Fight." Fa Xiang immediately nodded his head and then quietly said, "Later we will split into 2 teams. I will have to trouble Li Senior Brother and Zheng Shushu Senior Brother to temporarily hold off these giant ants. Lin Junior Brother and I will attack the Qin Wuyin together. How about it?" The 3 nodded in unison. While they were discussing, Qin Wuyin, who was standing at the periphery, was also thinking rapidly. Just now he controlled the huge ants to attack Li Sun, but Li Sun's high skills were still beyond his expectations. With just his strength alone, he killed close to 100 of those tough-skinned and hard bones plus highly poisonous huge ants. And from the looks of the other 3 people, most likely their skills were also not low, especially that Tianyin Temple Fa Xiang. These few years his reputation was even greater. Not to mention other things, just looking at this Prajna heart circle before him, it faintly contained the great Buddhist exorcism power, actually caused the death marsh giant ant to instinctively leave that golden circle without his control. This level of cultivation was really not a small matter. Just as he was worrying about how to deal with these 4 people, there was a sudden whistling sound in front of him. With a flash of golden light, the Prajna heart circle retracted. The 4 people actually pounced at him together, and the giant ants beside him were also in an uproar. Qin Wuyin was not alarmed, but instead delighted. With a loud laugh, his left hand flipped and a small black iron flute appeared, but he did not place it by his mouth to play and instead streaked across the air. His left hand tapped a few holes on the flute, and immediately a low and quiet sound was heard in the air. The people did not seem to feel anything, but the innumerable death marsh giant ants seemed to have suddenly received some order. Immediately all of them started to move. One by one they bared their fangs and brandished their claws, pouncing towards the 4 good faction people. Li Sun and Zheng Shushu had long expected such a situation. They moved forward at the same time, wielding their esper. The esper flashed with a bright light. Immediately the first dozen giant ants that pounced over were shaken away, but both of their arms also faintly hurt from the recoil. Li Sun, after all, had just fought with these giant ants and with experience. He was not surprised, but Zheng Shushu's countenance changed, secretly thought that these beasts were really powerful. Both of them exerted their might, and in a short while actually blocked the innumerable giant ants to the side. Lin Jingyu and Fa Xiang transformed into a brilliant light. Like lightning charged up, the Dragon Slayer sword transformed into a jade green light that shot up to the sky, immediately forcing the surrounding darkness back several zhongs, slashed down towards Qin Wuyin. The power of this sword was so great that even Qin Wuyin frowned, secretly thinking that these good faction fellows were really not easy to deal with. But looking at his expression, there was no sign of panic. His left hand was still waving the demon control flute, making strange sounds, directing the innumerable death marsh giant ants to surround and attack. A dagger radiating clear light appeared in his right hand, barely blocking Lin Jingyu's sword. Fa Xiang, who was watching from behind, frowned, recognized that this dagger was the rare treasure of one Du clan used by the god of poison in the Battle of Qin Yun 10 years ago, said in a deep voice, "Sever yearning?" Qin Yin was stunned. A trace of admiration flashed past his eyes, while holding off Lin Jingyu. He said, "Fa Xiang Master is indeed knowledgeable. It is indeed Sever Yearning Celestial Dagger." Fa Xiang flashed to Lin Jingyu's side, but was not in a hurry to make a move, indifferently said, "A pity such a divine weapon, with your distinguished self's talent, instead you have gone astray. Why not repent and be saved?" Qin Wuyin laughed, his left hand waving the flute, his right hand the dagger flashing. Suddenly he took 5 steps, his figure elegant and at ease, recited, "A beauty far away, yearning bitter, a few words of gratitude, difficult to repay. 10 years of love, 100 years of crossing, not sever yearning, can't bear to care." His usually peaceful face, right now, a faint purple gas suddenly surfaced, with the clear brilliance of the sever yearning celestial dagger in front of him. Instantly the clear light flourished, gradually suppressing the jade-green light of the Dragon Slayer sword. At the same time a rare, arrogant look appeared on his face. In a clear voice he said, "Master sees me sinking into the evil way. I instead laugh at Master's infatuation. The 10,000 ways in this world are in reason, don't tell. Me your shore is the shore. My shore is the sea." Fa Xiang smiled, did not take his words to heart, was about to help Lin Jingyu, when suddenly from the clear light in front of Qin Huiyin, Lin Jingyu's voice was heard firmly, 10,000 ways in heaven, originally as one, righteous heart, is in the hearts of the people. You are the evil, I am the good, I will exterminate the demon and subdue the evil. A clear whistle, the dragon slayer's sword roared loudly. The jade-green light glimmered, charged up to the sky, broke out from the clear light. Instantly the thousands of sword energy, like rain, covered the sky and covered the earth, charged towards Qin Huiyin. Qin Huiyin frowned. He did not expect this person to be so valiant. Right now, he only needed to use the sever-yearning celestial weapon to pursue, and most likely, he would be able to injure him seriously, but the dragon slayer sword in front of him, with an indomitable, invincible sword, he knew he would not be able to withstand it and could only evade. With this distraction, his hands slowed a little, and the controlling demon flute that was controlling the death marsh giant ants could not be attended to for the moment. Zheng Shushu and Li Sun, who were bitterly resisting at the back, finally managed to catch a breath. Although it was only a short while, but these ferocious giant ants were charging forward without fear of death. It was really a headache for them. Zheng Shushu opened his mouth and shouted, "Hey, Fa Xiang senior brother, what time is it now, and you are still enlightening others? Please do it quickly, or else, if we are eaten by these beasts, you will have to chant the rebirth incantation for me." Fa Xiang laughed bitterly and did not say much, watching Qin Huiyin resisting Lin Jingyu's wave after wave of attacks. He said in a clear voice, "Qin patron, be careful." After speaking, the reincarnation pearl glimmered with golden light, flew over diagonally. Qin Huiyin frowned. This Lin Jingyu's skills were already beyond his expectations, and now, with another Fa Xiang, he snorted and did not seem to make any movement, but suddenly 3 shadows flew out from his right sleeve, swiftly separated and flew towards Fa Xiang from 3 sides. Fa Xiang's expression was solemn. Otherwise he would be careless. The reincarnation pearl flew halfway, and instantly the golden light shone brightly, swiftly blocking 2 of the shadows, but there was still one that penetrated through the golden light. Fa Xiang snorted. Suddenly his fingers like a knife, his fair palms stretched out horizontally, aimed at the incoming shadow and shouted, "Do!" That shadow in the air suddenly shook violently. The next moment, as if it suffered a heavy blow, fell from the air. It was a small black snake with a triangular head. Obviously, it was highly poisonous. After falling to the ground, it struggled and twisted a few times, and then there was no more movement, most likely dead. Qin Huiyin was surprised, nodded and praised. Mind lockability. Indeed worthy to be the Buddhist sect Tianyin Temple No. 1 successor. Master skills are high. I really admire it, but master killing so casually. I wonder if Buddha will blame you? Fa Xiang had yet to speak. Lin Jingyu had already attacked with all his might, enveloping Qin Huiyin in a sheet of jade-green light. He sneered and said, "All of you evildoers, usually you kill countless, commit uncountable sins, and at this moment you are still questioning others with a righteous face? Really shameless." Qin Huiyin laughed, avoided the dragon slayer's sword's unstoppable edge. The severed yearning divine dagger glowed with clear light and counterattacked. At the same time his right hand shook. In a short moment 7 or 8 shadows flew out from his sleeve, brown, black, dark red, scarlet yellow, borrowing the brilliant light from the magical weapons. The crowd could only see that they were all kinds of scorpions, centipedes, and other highly poisonous creatures, all charged towards Fa Xiang. For the moment he was blocked at a distance, unable to come over. Chapter 187. Everyone was speechless, thinking that the evil sect sorcerers were indeed strange. So many poisonous insects hiding on their bodies, and they were not afraid of being bitten. Zhang Shushu, who was far away, thought the furthest. He actually thought that if his senior and junior sisters saw these countless poisonous insects, would they be so frightened that their bodies would turn to jelly and they would not even be able to lift up their magical weapons? Just as this thought flashed through his mind, his hand loosened, and he was almost bitten by a giant ant. Fortunately, it only bit the edge of his shoe. This was no small matter, and he hurriedly focused his mind to deal with it. Just that he and Li Sun had to deal with these countless huge ants at the same time. The pressure was really too great. In this short period of time, both of them had killed another 100 huge ants, but these bees seemed to be endless and continued to swarm over. Zhang Shushu and Li Sun looked at each other. Both saw the intention to retreat in each other's eyes. Zhang Shushu was about to turn back and urge them again, but from the corner of his eyes, a faint blue light flashed past deep in the forest. He subconsciously was startled. Qin Huiyin frowned tightly. Almost at the same time, the intention to retreat sprouted in his heart. Today, these four people were really not easy to deal with. The Death Marsh huge ants, which he thought were invincible, were actually blocked by those two people and could not take a step forward for a long time. And here, this Qin Yun sect disciple's Dragon Slayer sword attack was really something he had never seen in his life. From time to time, he would see him pressing forward with an indomitable will and leaving no way out. It was really a headache. And the various poisonous creatures over there seemed like they would not be able to stop Fa Xiong for long. If they waited for this person to come over, most likely the situation would be lost. Qin Huiyin was the god of poison's proudest disciple. Although he was young, but he was extremely decisive. Right now he made a prompt decision. His right hand shook, and another 3 different toads flew out to entangle Fa Xiong. His right hand, severed yearning, shone brightly, and suddenly launched a massive counterattack. The attack was so ferocious that even Lin Jingyu had no choice but to retreat a few steps. Taking advantage of this moment, Qin Huiyin suddenly stood up, distanced himself from the rest, laughed, and said, "Let's end it here tonight." Before he finished, suddenly Zhang Shushu shouted loudly, "Lu Senior Sister, quickly stop this person." Qin Huiyin was shocked. From the corner of his eyes, he saw a blue light suddenly appearing in the darkness beside him. Although he was shocked, he did not panic. Severed yearning was already in front of the blue light. He was confident that no matter how powerful this sword was, he would be able to withstand it. Unexpectedly, in the dark night, although the blue light appeared, in the mournful sound of the wind, suddenly the entire world instantly became silent. From the other side of the darkness, a cold feeling silently surged over, forcefully collided with his right side. Even though Qin Huiyin had always been meticulous, but in the end he was at a disadvantage in this instant. While a big mouthful of blood spurted out, the clothes on his chest were dyed red, but in this life-and-death situation, he forced himself to take a breath. The next moment, sound from his right arm incessantly. In a blink of an eye, several poisonous monsters were released, obstructing the group. At the same time, he flew back far away. After a long time, his resentful voice was heard. His voice was already weak, but it was still very mournful, sternly said, "Ghostly, consider yourself ruthless. We'll settle this score in the future." The sudden change, everyone was stunned for a moment. Just that Qin Huiyin suddenly disappeared. The numerous Death Marsh huge ants lost control for a moment, but these ferocious beasts had always been bloodthirsty. Instead, they charged up even more ferociously. Zhang Shushu and Li Sun could not withstand them, and after a moment, even Fa Xiong and Lin Jingyu were also surrounded. And that blue light in the air floated up, paused slightly in the air, and suddenly disregarded the people in the forest, like thunder, as fast as lightning, charged into the other side of the darkness. And there someone snorted, and then dark green light shone, but did not have the intention to fight, immediately turned and left, just that blue light refused to give up and immediately chased after them. What kind of skills did those two people have? In a blink, they only left after images. A moment later, not even their shadows could be seen. Fa Xiong and the rest shouted and simultaneously flew up, leaving the ground. Those huge ants did not have any opponents. Many of their companions had died for no reason. They must have been extremely enraged and roared incessantly at the sky. Fa Xiong and the rest could not be bothered with those beasts and quickly raised their eyes to search. Unexpectedly, in just a short while, the forest became pitch black again. That one green, one blue light had gone somewhere. They couldn't help but looked at each other in dismay. After a long while, Zhang Shushu suddenly quietly said, "Is it him?" Fa Xiong was silent for a moment. A complicated expression flashed past his eyes, but eventually he still sighed and said, "It should be him." Both of them looked at each other and at the same time at Lin Jingyu, only to see that young man standing in the air, the night breeze blowing past, making his clothes flutter on his handsome face. There was no expression, but that pair of eyes kept staring at this dark forest in a daze. Deep into the night, The ancient forest was quiet, as if even the sounds of the insects in the depths of the darkness had suddenly disappeared. Even the sound of the wind blowing in the forest became more mournful and bitter, as if narrating the sorrow of the night. The green light flashed past in the darkness, like a light passerby stepping into the darkness, but that blue light behind him suddenly appeared. It was this dazzling light, dashed into the darkness, forcing the darkness back, closely pursuing that green light. That green light suddenly shuttled back and forth in the forest, suddenly flew high, its speed getting faster and faster, but no matter what it did, it could not shake off that blue light behind it. Looking up from the darkness, the blue light seemed to be disregarding everything, pursuing relentlessly, not willing to give up. Who was it, quietly sighing in the darkness? Who was it, opened his heart in the night? The darkness surged in from all directions and then retreated. The sound of the wind brushed against his face and then quickly disappeared. That once familiar figure kept on drifting in the night, reverberating in whose eyes? See, a soft sound. That green light suddenly stopped and then dissipated, revealing Ghost Lee's figure, quietly standing on the highest branch of a big tree. Just a few feet away from him, the blue light also stopped abruptly stopped behind him. That Tianya celestial sword, which was dazzling even in this night, held in that fair hand, coldly pointed at him. Deep into the night, the sound of the wind was mournful, their clothes gently fluttering in the wind. Ghostly slowly, unhurriedly turned around, facing that face. She was in this world, such a beautiful and indescribable lady. That beauty had not been eroded by time, as if suffocating and also intoxicating. Her face cold, holding the sword pointed at him. Tianya like frost-cold sword edge, just inches away from him. Even on his throat, he seemed to feel that trace of coldness. And inexplicably, deep in his heart, that faint sorrow. The wind blew the treetops, their bodies also swayed gently in the night breeze. No one said anything. They just stared at him quietly. These 10 years of time, suddenly from his heart, bit by bit slowly churned, surged in his heart. Her hand, holding the sword as white as 10 years, not so long ago. Did she ever hold in her hand? He smiled, with a faint bitterness, softly said, "Are you still well?" Lusweki did not answer, did not say a word. Her lips were pale from biting hard. Her figure in the darkness was sad and beautiful. Ghostly no, Zhang Xiaofan, in this dark night, without moonlight, in front of this girl, he suddenly seemed to have returned to 10 years ago. His body also seemed to be in the shadows, with an unknown slight tremble. "Why didn't you kill me?" That beautiful lady quietly said. The frost-like cold Tianya, still in her hand, pointed at him. He looked at her eyes. They were so bright, like a silent flame. He lowered his head slightly. After a long time, he looked at his own figure, looked at her gently swaying in front of his shadow, faintly said, 10 years ago in Crystal Hall, why did you disregard everything to protect me? Speak up for me." Anan did not speak. Only the corner of her mouth slightly moved, the hand holding the sword, so tight, like afraid of something. In those bright eyes, who was it that was flickering? Shah Danan. Still did not change? In these 10 years, really did not change. She stared blankly, bit her lips, make herself still cold, make her eyes not blur. But whose heart was it that was beating like this, beating intensely in the heart that had been cold for a long time, that faint gentleness that had been silent for a long time, quietly lingering in the countless nights at this moment, suddenly blazed like a blazing flame, burning in the chest. At the corner of her mouth, there was a trace of bitterness, a faint moisture. Her hand holding the sword slowly dropped down. She looked up at the sky. The wind blew her soft and beautiful hair, brushing against her fair cheeks. So, in the sky, it began to rain again. Chapter 188. Rain started to fall from the sky. The rain was not heavy. The sky also looked a little dusky. This was already the second consecutive day of rain. Xiao Yikai frowned tightly, suddenly turned his head and spoke to the person beside him. "Yin Jr.'s sister, have you discovered anything?" Standing with him, was Funxiang Valley Yanhong. Ever since that day in the miasma where the good faction people were separated, Xiao Yikai entered the inner marsh. Because the direction was different, he did not meet Fa Xiong, Lin Jingyu, etc., but met Yanhong nearby. Although they were not from the same sect, but they felt close to each other, and these few days they traveled together. Just that after searching for a few days in this boundless forest, they still did not find anything other than trees. There were more trees, and then there was the incessant rain, countless poisonous insects on the ground. It was really a headache, sometimes thinking about it. No wonder there was no one here. How was it a place for people to live? But even so, what should be done still had to be done. Xiao Yikai and Yanhong searched the vicinity carefully. At the same time, he also sensed, although Yanhong was very courteous to him, but she seemed to be on guard against something. Right now, he saw Yanhong seem to have seen something, kept staring at a spot in the forest. He could not help but ask her. Yanhong heard and suddenly said, "Xiao, senior brother, look over there. There seems to be something strange." Xiao Yikai was shocked, looked towards where Yanhong was pointing, behind the layers of rain, between the dense leaves. Suddenly a weak golden light flashed and then disappeared. Xiao Yikai's heart moved, saw that after a long time, that golden light flashed again, just that the distance seemed to have increased by a few degrees. Xiao Yikai and Yanhong looked at each other. Both of them almost at the same time recalled the rumor about the unusual treasure omen. It was the huge golden light pillar shooting up to the sky. Could it be, after a while, both of them almost at the same time soared into the sky, dashed towards that direction as fast as lightning. And while they were flying, they seemed to subconsciously distance themselves from each other, at the same time secretly controlling their magical weapons tightly, not knowing if they were guarding against the unknown danger or the danger around them. The two of them flew extremely fast and soon arrived near the glittering golden light. Avoiding the dense foliage, they saw that the forest was in a mess. There were broken brambles everywhere. Even the thick tree trunks beside them were full of scars. What's more, a few trees that were as thick as a person's arms around the trunk had fallen. In the forest, this mess led straight ahead. It looked as if someone or a monster had unleashed its power and forcefully opened up a path in the dense forest. Xiao Yikai and Yanhong looked at each other, saw the indistinct shock in each other's eyes. And at this moment, ahead of the forest, indistinct noises were heard again. Xiao Yikai gestured to Yanhong. Both of them flew up lightly, concealed themselves in the branches and leaves, and secretly flew forward. After flying for a while, he saw fallen trees everywhere along the way. There were also many dead animals among them. Most of them had not been able to dodge in time and suffered an undeserved disaster. The clamor in front of them grew louder and louder, and there were even sounds of Buddhist chanting mixed in. Xiao Yikai was startled. Thought could it be Tian'in Temple Fa Xiang's senior brother was here? Just as he was hesitating, he suddenly saw a golden light in front of him, followed by a loud roar. In an instant, it was like a tangible sound wave vibrating and rumbling. All the branches and leaves of the surrounding trees shook together. The power was not to be underestimated. But Xiao Yikai's expression changed. In this Buddhist subduing evil roar, there was anxiety and urgency. Looking at the situation, it was not good. Tian'in Temple and Qingyun sect relationship was not like Funxiang Valley. Xiao Yikai hesitated for a moment and eventually still rushed out. The next moment, a sound of wind was heard. Yanhong also followed up. Both of them were in the air, taking in the situation at a glance. They could not help but be stunned and then shocked. There was indeed a monk dressed in Tian'in Temple monk robes, but it was not the gentle Fa Xiang, but the tall and sturdy Fashion. Right now, Fashion's monk robes were puffed up. An extremely thick Vajra, subduing evil staff in his hand, was waving like a violent storm, golden light flashing, protecting his entire body. At the same time, his mouth was repeatedly roaring. The person fighting against him was a beautiful woman dressed in light yellow clothes. She had an affectionate expression on her face and a smile on her lips. Her black hair fluttered lightly beside her shoulders, and her eyes were watery. When one looked at her, it seemed as if they would immerse themselves in her and never come out again. Xiao Yikai only took 2 glances at her. His heart was suddenly stirred. felt that in the heaven and earth, there was only this girl left. He really wanted to spend his life with her. But luckily he had cultivated for many years. His skills were not shallow. Suddenly he was startled and thought, where did this witch come from to have such a strong bewitching skill? Although Fashion's imposing manner was frightening, but in Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong's eyes, they could see that his face was flushed. Actually, he was already forced by the beautiful girl in front of him to defend. If there was no external help, most likely he would not even last for an hour. Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong were secretly shocked, but no matter how they tried, they could not recall who this girl was. Her skills were actually so high to be able to beat one of Tian'in Temple's most outstanding disciples other than Fa Xiong until he could not retaliate. Seeing that Fashion was on the verge of defeat, Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong looked at each other. With a shout, charged down, wielded Qing Yun Sec Tongtian Peak's famous celestial sword 7-star sword, transformed into a stream of white light, struck down from above. And beside, Yan Hong's hand also released a stream of green gas. It was her magical weapon, Green Spirit Stone, closely chasing down. That light yellow attired girl heard the shout from above. Her countenance changed. A trace of anger seemed to flash past her face, just that the thousands of flirtatious expressions seemed to have transformed into a soul-stirring beauty, faintly written on her face, captivating one's soul. Xiao Yikai was after all the current Qing Yun sect #1 disciple. His skills were high, not something an ordinary person could compare to. Where the 7-star sword light was, it had already stretched into an enormous sword light, slashed down from above. That girl frowned. She did not dare to underestimate the enemy, and saw another girl behind her. Her skills also not low. She had no choice but to float backwards. At the same time, her right hand moved, suddenly grabbed in the air. Out of nowhere, a purple light flashed, dazzling the eyes. A strange purple magical weapon, steaming with propitious energy, was blocked in front of her, collided heavily with the 7-star sword and Green Spirit Stone. Punk! A muffled sound. That girl floated backwards. Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong also landed beside Fashion. Xiao Yikai quietly asked Fashion, "Fashion's senior brother, are you all right?" Fashion's face was flushed, panting heavily. After a long, while he caught his breath, said, "Xiao senior brother, be careful. This girl is evil sect Hehuan's sect, which Jean Pinger. She is very powerful." Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong were shocked. These few years, Jean Pinger could be said to be an influential figure in the evil sect. Together with Qin Huiyin, ghostly the three of them were known as the Three Gongzi, and was seen as a great calamity by the good faction. Unexpectedly today they met. It was actually such a beautiful girl. But when he recalled the intense bewitchment when he first saw her, Xiao Yikai knew that most likely this person was really Hehuan's sect's Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger stood at the front. Her heart was really vexed. Initially, after she entered the Death Marsh, she searched for many days, but to no avail. Today, she met Tian'in Temple monk Fashion, who was alone. Both of them did not get along and started to fight. Fashion had cultivated for many years his Buddhism skills. In a younger generation of Tian'in Temple, other than the talented Fa Xiong, there was no second, just that this Jean Pinger was even more powerful. The moment she came up, she suddenly threw flirtatious glances, even with Fashion's strong Buddhism skills. Under this evil sect Hehuan's sect's secret, bewitching skill, he was caught off guard and suffered a great loss. For a moment his mind was in turmoil. His skills were only at 60%. After that, under Jean Pinger's seemingly casual but actually swift and fierce attacks, Fashion tried his best to protect himself, to maintain a trace of clarity in his mind, struggling to hold on. But if not for Xiao Yikai and Yan Hong's timely arrival, most likely today Fashion would have been subdued by this Jean Pinger. His past cultivation would be wasted, controlled by this bewitching skill, like a walking corpse. He would have to listen to Jean Pinger's commands for the rest of his life. Right now, Jean Pinger was assessing Xiao Yikai from top to bottom, suddenly smiled. Her voice was gentle, said, "This Gongzi, don't know what enmity do you have with me. The first attack is so heavy. Want to put little girl to death." Chapter 189. Xiao Yikai glanced at her and saw that her eyes were like water, bright and sparkling. Looking at it in this evening, it was as bright as the stars in the night sky, really made one's heart palpitate. Xiao Yikai's palms could not help but sweated. He forced himself to calm down and did not look at her eyes. Loudly said, "Miss must be from evil sect Huan's sect, the famous Jean Pinger. I have long heard of your name." Jean Pinger smiled and said, "Oh, you recognize me?" Xiao Yikai said, "It is also the first time for me to meet Miss today. Just that fashion master is from Tianyin Temple, like our Qingyan sect. We are both good faction people. For me to battle with Miss is also expected." Jean Pinger frowned slightly, and then smiled and said, "If that is the case, I would like to ask which branch of Qingyan sect expert Gongzi is from." Xiao Yikai said, "I dare not. I am Qingyan sect Tongtian Peak Xiao Yikai. This is Funxiang Valley, Miss Yanhong." Jean Pinger's eyes scanned Yanhong's face, saw that she was also quite beautiful, could not help but took a few more glances. Yanhong's skills among the younger generation in Funxiang Valley had always been on par with Li Sun as one of the twin Jade Annulus, just that she was a low-profile person and did not wish to stand out. Whenever there was any matter, it was Li Sun who would handle it. Right now, when she came down with Xiao Yikai, she had not spoken a word. Just that right now, being stared at by Jean Pinger, she could not help but look at Jean Pinger. Unexpectedly with this look, she saw that beautiful girl's skin was like snow, her features like a painting. After a while, even she could not help but feel slightly dizzy, couldn't help but was greatly shocked. At the same time her face turned slightly red, secretly thought that evil sect witchcraft was really shameless and evil. Even as a girl, she could actually be bewitched by it. When Xiao Yikai came over, it was already dusk, and now, with the commotion, the sky gradually darkened again. Jean Pinger stood there prettily, facing Xiao Yikai and the other three people. In her heart, she secretly thought, that sword technique just now, this Xiao Yikai's skills are really not low, and there are still two people beside him. Although she is not afraid, but the Death Marsh treasure has not appeared yet. To fight with them here pointless. It is really not wise. With that thought, she had the intention to leave. Xiao Yikai, who was there, looked at her expression, suddenly stepped forward and was about to say something, but at this moment, deep inside the Death Marsh, far away in the incessant rain, suddenly a deafening sound like a tiger's roar or dragon's cry was heard. The sound was so loud that even the Buddhist demon subduing roar that F.A. Shan made was like a child's play, not even worth mentioning. In an instant, the wind and clouds in the sky changed and surged at a speed that could be seen. The clouds evaporated, and layer after layer of scenes were like roaring and rushing waves. It really caused the world to change color. Everyone was shocked. They felt that the sound was like an awl piercing into their brains. They could not stand steadily. After a moment, under the astonished gazes of the crowd, in the distant darkness, a dazzling golden light suddenly soared up, gradually brightening, gradually thickening. In the end, it turned into an incomparably huge golden light pillar. In the rumbling sound, it shot up to the sky, pierced into the clouds. In that instant, illuminated the sky and earth. Everywhere was golden light. The clouds were golden clouds. The trees were golden trees. Xiao Yikai, Jean Pinger, and the rest were awed by the spectacle, and for a moment forgot that they were enemies. One by one looked up and saw that the golden light pillar became brighter and brighter, until it was almost too bright to look at. The wind and clouds surged even more violently in the horizon, swirling rapidly around the golden light pillar, forming an enormous vortex illuminated by the golden light. Under such a spectacular scene, the world was solemn, as if there was some supreme and precious object, making one to feel respect. After a long time, the golden light pillar which suddenly appeared then slowly stopped, and then swiftly weakened, as if it came suddenly and left quickly, in a short while the earth-shattering scene, like a whale sucking in water, retreated back into the darkness. After the dazzling light, an even deeper darkness than before descended on the earth. Jean Pinger, Xiao Yikai, and the rest were all quick-witted people, instantly thought that this was the rumored sign of the birth of a rare treasure. Now that they saw it with their own eyes, the aura of the treasure's birth could really be described as unimaginable, They really did not know what kind of treasure it was. Compared to that, the battle before them was really too insignificant. Almost at the same time, Jean Pinger, Xiao Yikai, Yanhong flew up at the same time, headed towards the direction of the golden light pillar. Only Fashion was slightly slower, but he too followed closely behind. In the darkness, they turned into 4 rays of magnificent light, flew over, although the scale of that golden light pillar was really too big and they were unable to pinpoint the exact location, but the birth of the rare treasure was obviously right before their eyes. Once they thought of that, these hard-working cultivators, how could their hearts not palpitate with eagerness? At the other corner of the Death Marsh's inner marsh, the strong wind brought about by the golden light pillar blew the dense forest leaves neatly to one side. Only Qing Long and Yu Ji, who were standing on the treetops, floated with the wind, unmoved. Following that spectacular heaven and earth scene slowly subsided, Qing Long heaved a long sigh, sighed softly, and said, "The creation of heaven and earth, endless and endless, is really not something that we mortals can understand. I have always prided myself on my erudition. Never did I expect to see such an extraordinary scene today. Only then I know that there is always someone better out there." Yuji slowly retracted her gaze. Because of the black veil covering her face could not be seen clearly. After a long while she indifferently said, "When the golden light appears, the yellow bird will definitely appear. This sentence is engraved on the hidden dragon cauldron. Just that the yellow bird is an ancient celestial beast, the 9 heaven spiritual bird. Even the remnant ancient scrolls, strange tales of deities and demons, praised it incessantly. Don't tell me we can really deal with it?" Qing Long smiled and said, "Third sister, why do you have to worry so much? That year on the East Sea Lubo Hill, Ghost King sect leader used the entrapped dragon watchtower inscribed on the hidden dragon cauldron for the first time. With the hidden dragon cauldron's ancient divine power, he subdued the rare beast Kuei Nio in one fell swoop. From then we know that the 4 divinities' blood formation on the hidden dragon cauldron really has an extraordinary effect. Now that everything is ready, even Ghost King sect leader is at ease to let us come. What are you still worried about? Unless you don't believe in Ghost King sect leader?" Yuji was silent for a long time, faintly said, "Sect leader has great talent and bold vision. I've always respected him. Why would I doubt him? Just that I always feel 4 divinities' blood formation, this kind of strange and unfathomable thing. Why should we go?" Qing Long's countenance changed, suddenly cut her off, and said, "Third sister, this kind of matter is not something you and I can discuss in the future in front of outsiders. Never say it." Yuji's veil moved slightly, looked at Qing Long, saw him frowning tightly, his face solemn, couldn't help but became silent, and then slowly nodded. Qing Long was then at ease, then slowly said, "Third sister, don't blame me for being long-winded. Actually, these few years, especially after Miss Baiyao's incident, Ghost King sect leader's character has gradually changed. Although he is still courteous and respectful to us usually, but I can see that he is usually decisive in handling matters. His murderous heart is already gradually growing. We are after all his subordinates. It is hard to predict his superior's intention. It is better to be more careful." Yuji quietly said, "Yes, big brother, I know." Qing Long glanced at her, and then slowly turned around. After remaining silent for a long time, suddenly said, "I wonder where Ghostly is in the Death Marsh now." Yuji, behind him, looked ahead. Right now the dark night was boundless. The earth-shattering golden light pillar had already disappeared, leaving only darkness. She couldn't help but ask, "Big brother, hasn't Ghost King sect leader always trusted Ghostly the most? Why didn't he tell him that we will be coming here and also our purpose of coming?" Qing Long turned and glanced at Yuji, did not speak. Yuji seemed to be stunned, seemed to recall something, and then raised her head slightly. Looked afar, indistinctly heard her voice, softly drifting, can't say again. Chapter 190. The sky gradually brightened. The rain stopped and the wind stopped. The first ray of light in the morning penetrated through the thick clouds in the sky, and the mist drifting in the Death Marsh spilled down. In the forest there was silence everywhere, but slowly, as the glimmer of light shone, it started to become noisy. From an unknown place, the first bird cry was heard. Immediately, following the rays of light that spilled down from the gaps of the branches and leaves, the entire forest seemed to have awakened from the deep sleep of the night. Far or near, the joyful cries of the morning were heard everywhere, welcoming this new day. Right now in the forest, the mist as thin as white muslin floated everywhere. Walking in it, one's face would feel slightly moist. In addition to the especially fresh air in the forest, breathing it in, one really felt broadened. Ghostly inhaled a deep breath of this morning air, expressionlessly looked ahead. Even Xiao Hui, who was crouching on his shoulder, also stretched its body. About 10 zhongs ahead, in the direction of that golden light pillar last night, the mist suddenly became thick, hazy, and indistinct, making one unable to see clearly. Just that this mist was different from the miasma at the edge of the inner marsh. The color was not gray. It was already pure white. Looking from afar, the mist gently drifted in the forest, strand by strand, layer by layer. That might be where the rare treasure was. Ghostly slowly turned his head and looked to the side. Anan was standing 2 zhongs away from him, her clothes as white as snow, quietly staring at the mist ahead. They, in the end, still did not make a move. For the entire night, after that moment of surprise and indistinct excitement, between the two of them, it was a long silence. The distance between the two of them was only 3 chi, but it seemed to be a chasm even bigger than the forsaken abyss, deeply engraved between them, even more engraved in their hearts. Even when the brilliant golden pillar of light soared into the sky, they turned around and looked into the distance. Their faces were illuminated by the golden light in the sky. In this foreign and unfamiliar place, when they quietly looked over, they still felt a little chilly. The past events, after all, had changed. Lu Sweki seemed to feel something, turned her head and met Ghostly's gaze. Her eyes were as clear as water. Maybe in the depths of her eyes, there were faint ripples, but right now, no one could see it. She looked at the man in front of her. He was standing beside her in the forest. Now that she looked at him carefully, she finally realized that he was no longer the young man from before. The face that had once been so familiar to him was now filled with the vicissitudes of life and calmness, and had lost its innocence and smile. She lowered her head slightly, her eyes like water, resting on the Tianya celestial sword in her hand, as if thinking about something. After a moment, her voice was light and fleeting, suddenly said, "You come back." She did not raise her head, did not move. Even her expression did not change the slightest. Only her hand holding Tianya, slender and fair fingers, gradually tightened. "Junior brother Zhang," she said softly, "come back." These words were words that floated in the morning breeze. They surrounded him, and then, like stones, they rushed into his heart one by one. Ghostly breathed deeply, closed his eyes. The ice-cold, soul-absorbing stick in his sleeve, beside his hand, like the most loyal friend, had never left him. After a long time, when he opened his eyes, there was a faint smile on his face. He slowly said, "This name, I will not use it for a long time." Lu Sweki's lips twitched, slowly raised her head, but in the end she did not say anything. She was silent. They had been standing like that, but the distance between them, right now, seemed to have widened. The morning light shone on that beautiful girl's face, slowly exuding a soul-stirring beauty. The mist in the forest also seemed to be attracted by her, gently danced around her. In that instant, her face also seemed to blur. Lu Sweki turned, strode forward, without saying anything, walked towards the depths of the mist, leaving that man behind her. Just that, when her figure was gradually blurring in the mist, suddenly she heard that man's voice, unhurriedly said, "Will you kill me?" Her figure disappeared in the white mist. No one could see her eyes, her expression, her body. In this silent morning, not knowing how long had passed, her drifting voice was heard from the mist, "I will. So when you can kill me, feel free to do so." The sky was bright, but the feeling of walking in the mist was still dusky. The mist in this place was much thicker than other places, and one could not see too far. Ghostly walked in the forest. He had already discovered that other than the mist, although it was still a forest, but it was very different from the outside. Apart from the towering trees that still stood tall in the fog, there were very few thistles and thorns on the ground like in the forest outside. Perhaps it was because the fog here was too thick and the sunlight couldn't be seen. But the most surprising thing was the numerous poisonous insects, ferocious beasts, and rare flowers and plants that once covered the entire Death Marsh forest suddenly disappeared. Ghostly walked in this forest for at least an hour and did not even see a single poisonous insect. Here, there seemed to be no animals at all, a deathly stillness. Ghostly frowned and continued to walk forward. Xiao Hui on his shoulder had also quieted down, its hands clutching tightly onto his clothes, but a pair of intelligent eyes were still darting around, constantly looking around. Because there were no brambles and shrubs, and those annoying poisonous insects and beasts, it was much easier to walk on the ground. Ever since he entered the inner marsh, this was the first time. Lu Sueki entered the mist earlier than him. Ghostly outside the mist, deliberately waited for a long time before entering. Right now, he did not even know where Lu Sueki was. Just that, as he walked like this in the forest, while carefully observing the surroundings for any unusual movements, his mind kept flashing past that white-attired lady's figure. "You come back." Ghostly faced himself, using a voice that only he could hear, softly muttered these 4 words. Qingyan Hill, Big Bamboo Valley, observed Silence Hall, small courtyard, bamboo forest. His lips moved slightly, a slightly bitter smile surfaced, said, "I can no longer go back, am I right, Xiao Hui?" Ji. The monkey Xiao Hui softly called out twice, not knowing what it meant. Ghostly stretched out his hand, stroked Xiao Hui. After a moment, suddenly pulled himself together, with a carefree smile, strided in big strides, heading deeper into the mist. This walk was another less than an hour. The trees in the forest became thicker and thicker towards the back. Almost everywhere were huge trees that required 2 people to encircle. Ghostly observed his surroundings, secretly shocked. These 10 years, he was stimulated by the Qingyan Hill battle, in addition to the subtle influence of the magical weapon's sinister orb and soul-absorbing. Other than concentrating on his training, his character gradually becoming violent and murderous, he also learned other knowledge from Ghost King. And this generation's Ghost King was really a rare talent. Not to mention his high skills, he was also well-read and had a broad breadth of knowledge. Because of his relationship with Bai Yao, Ghost King treated him like his own son, wholeheartedly taught him, under his intentional nurturing, the current Ghostly. Not only his cultivation, even his knowledge and experience, was far from what that ignorant Qingyun sect disciple could be compared to. Right now, he was observing the gigantic trees in the forest. Actually, not all of them were rare trees. Among them, there were oak trees, maple trees, locust trees, etc. If it was in the normal mountains outside of the Death Marsh, there would be many of them. But the strange thing was that the various trees here were especially huge. The ordinary ones were only half their size, and it was already shocking, not to mention so many of them gathered together. What was even more strange was, where these huge trees were, it should have been full of life, but under this thick mist, not a single animal could be seen. Even the thistles and thorns that were occasionally seen when they first came in were all gone. Even on the ground, other than the occasional huge tree roots that peeked out from the ground, it was just solid and slightly yellow soil. There wasn't even a single blade of grass. Under the cold mist was an austere atmosphere. Ghostly frowned deeply. After pondering for a long time, he looked around, saw the huge trees towering to the sky. Perfectly straight and tall, he strolled in the forest, as if he was in an enormous maze. He suddenly waved his sleeve, his entire body rose up. Unwilling to stay in this strange place any longer, he steered the soul-absorbing stick in the dark green light, flew forward. This way his speed naturally increased by a lot, but considering that the treasure might be nearby, Ghostly did not fly above the forest and instead stayed 6 chi above the ground. While flying at high speed, he carefully searched the ground. Time passed by quietly. The forest was still quiet. Only the sound of him breaking through the air reverberated in the forest. The trees in the forest, as Ghostly gradually went deeper, the trunks became bigger and bigger, right now reflected in his eyes. Most of them were already unbelievably thick ancient trees that required 6, 7 burly men to wrap their arms around. Without even thinking, it was obvious that the trees here most likely all had a few hundred or even 1,000 years of lifespan. In the strange atmosphere which was getting thicker and thicker, Ghostly's figure suddenly stopped. Right now it had already been daybreak for a long time, but the mist here did not seem to have any signs of dispersing, as if since ancient times, these layers of mist had coexisted with this stretch of forest. Right in the deepest part of this forest, Ghostly hovered in the air, standing in midair, gazing ahead. Chapter 191. In front of him stood a towering wall. Wooden wall. Coarse tree veins, hard and with slight cracks, suddenly stretched out from the depths of the mist, a wooden wall as high as 3 zhangs, like a strong and powerful horn dragon, lay across the huge forest, deeply embedded into the soil. Ghostly coldly watched, motionless, carefully assessed this wooden wall. The corner of his eyes started to twitch, following which he slowly moved his body, leaned over, and used his hand to gently caress it. The moment of contact, a warm yet coarse feeling was transmitted. Ghostly vaguely thought of something, but did not dare to believe it. He withdrew his hand. His body slowly drifted forward along this wooden wall. The white mist gradually dispersed in front of him, and again slowly condensed behind him. This wooden wall became taller and taller, thicker and thicker, gradually turning into a circular shape, and its height was also slowly rising. Finally, when it reached a height of about 6 zhangs, it reached the end of this wooden wall. Ghostly's body stopped. He breathed deeply but still could not calm his mind. In his uncontrollable heartbeat, everything in front of him passed through the mist and finally appeared before his eyes. This enormous wooden wall, at the end of the mist, harmoniously merged into an even larger object. In the sky, a ray of sunlight suddenly shone down from the mist and then disappeared, blocked by the mist. Ghostly finally confirmed the inconceivable conjecture in his heart. That enormous wooden wall was a section of tree root, layers of mist, drifting indeterminately. Because he was too surprised, he panted slightly and then abruptly raised his head. That gaze, like a ray of light penetrating through the mist, spilled over, straight up. Like a silent bolt of lightning, a roar, the entire forest trembled. What appeared in front of him was actually a huge tree that completely exceeded his imagination. The trunk was so thick in the fog that he couldn't see the end of it. The trunk was wrapped in rough bark, and it was like a towering mountain that soared into the sky. It disappeared into the fog, as if it had drilled into the clouds. Ghostly was like an ant in front of this enormous tree. He seemed insignificant. An enormous tree that even its tree root was as high as 6 zhangs? What kind of scene would it be? Ghostly slowly retracted his gaze. At that moment, Xiao Hui on his shoulder let out a low cry, as if also feeling uneasy. Ghostly tilted his head slightly, suddenly smiled, faintly said, "The world is so big. Nothing is too strange. We are indeed the frogs at the bottom of the well. Little Gray, let's go. Let's take a good look at this tree." Below his feet, the dark green light emitted by the soul-absorbing stick suddenly lit up. The next moment, it tilted upwards, Ghostly with a light whistle. Following that sound of breaking the air, 1 man and 1 monkey charged up to the sky, into the layers of mist. A strong gust of wind blew against his face. Because of the high speed, it seemed a little fierce. In this fog, it was somewhat similar to the situation in the miasma wall when he first entered the inner marsh. However, it was different after all. Firstly, there was no poisonous gas. Secondly, he could see further, just that these layers of fog actually condensed to an extremely high point. Ghostly flew along this unbelievably huge tree. Until now, he had flown for almost an hour. The fog still had not dissipated. He really wondered if it was connected to the clouds in the sky, just like that. At the same time, Ghostly also noticed that the trunk of the huge tree in front of him gradually had some changes. When it was on the ground, naturally the bottom of this huge tree was also unimaginably thick, and on the tree trunk, other than the rough bark, there was nothing else. But after flying for a long time, branches had already started to appear on this huge tree, and the most eye-catching thing was the first to appear, winding around the tree trunk, a strange plant similar to a vine, crisscrossing, its leaves huge. At the tip of the leaves, colorful flowers bloomed, red, yellow, orange, and purple, extremely beautiful. Drifting over with the wind, there seemed to be a faint fragrance. But until now, he was still unable to see clearly the trunk of this huge tree. Just how thick was it? The wonder of creation, it was really unimaginable. this strange tree in front of him most likely was really thousands of years old. That was why it was so huge. See, a sharp piercing sound, dark green light flashed, dashed out from the fog. The fog under his feet also followed his figure, drifted up a little, and then gently fell down, like the waves gently calming down. Ghostly finally dashed out of this fog. Heaven and earth suddenly opened up. The sky was azure blue, without a cloud for thousands of miles, the blue sky like it had been washed, and the white fog under his feet, winding around this huge tree. The closer he was to the huge tree, the thicker the fog. Right now, Ghostly was already high up in the sky, and finally could see this huge tree clearly. Even at such a high place, this huge tree trunk in front of him was still as thick as 100 jongs, and thinking of the distance from the ground to where he was now, it was not a tree, but a towering mountain. However, this was clearly a real tree, and it was still extending upwards. That huge tree trunk, other than the same shocking thick branches, was still extending straight up to the sky. Ghostly looked up, gazed afar, deep in the blue sky. There seemed to be a faint shadow. He suddenly smiled, facing the blue sky. Which man, in the face of such a scene, could not feel pride in his heart? He flew up, broke through the air, and left. His speed became faster and faster, allowing the strong wind to cut his face like knives. The higher he flew, the smaller the huge tree trunk, until the end, it was only several jongs in size. Even so, it was still shocking. Right now, there were already clouds, occasionally drifting beside the tree trunk. This huge tree seemed like the ancient legends, that stairway to heaven, straight up to the blue sky. Flying another 5 jongs or so, Ghostly's body finally stopped. In front of him, the straight tree trunk suddenly split into 2 huge branches, extending to the left and right. Ghostly pondered for a moment, unhurriedly flew over, landed at the fork of this huge tree. Said it was a fork, actually with the huge size of this huge tree. Even if several people stood here, it would not be crowded. Ghostly had just landed on the tree. A sound. Xiao Hui was the first to jump down. The monkey head looked around, and then carefully touched here and there on the tree trunk, obviously very curious. It was the first time in its life seeing such a huge tree. Even if it was a monkey, it was also very surprised. Ghostly smiled, did not bother about Xiao Hui. Flying swiftly all the way up, his heart was really shaken. Before this, he could not imagine that there would be such a huge tree in the world. And right now, after the initial shock, he already thought, could it be that the treasure was actually in this unimaginable tree? On top of the huge tree, the 2 branches that split off were similar in size, almost several jongs thick, flying horizontally in the air, like 2 huge dragons leaping in the air. From here, the branches and leaves gradually flourished, and the distance it extended was actually quite long. Standing at this fork, the ends could not be seen. Ghostly silently thought for a while, made up his mind, turned his head, and called out Xiao Hui. The monkey Xiao Hui was jumping here and there on the tree trunk, as if it was not afraid of this place being so high up from the ground. Sometimes it even ran to the edge of the tree, stuck its head out, and looked down. The monkey's guts were actually quite big. This time, hearing its master's call, it called out twice, happily jumped back, and landed on Ghostly's shoulder. Ghostly smiled and said, "Let's go." Xiao Hui's eyes rolled around, nodding incessantly. Seemed like the monkey's curiosity was also quite strong, grinning incessantly, looking very excited. Ghostly looked left and right. After a moment of contemplation, without any hesitation, again controlled the soul-absorbing stick in a dazzling dark green light, flew towards the left branch. This flight was for a long time. Although it was high up in the sky, the huge branches of this huge tree still had innumerable huge leaves, extremely luxuriant. But for some reason, he did not see any fruits or flowers. Instead, the nameless vines that had been entangling this huge tree from the bottom of the tree. Flowers were in full bloom. The branches were gorgeous. Following Ghostly's continuous flight, the branches on this side gradually became smaller, but for some reason, those vines instead became thicker, and those blooming flowers also increased, until the end it was everywhere, too much for the eyes to take in. An inexplicable fragrance drifted in the air. Suddenly, Ghostly's flying body abruptly stopped in midair. It came in such a hurry that a sharp sound was heard. The tree trunk before him was suddenly completely covered by innumerable vines. The flowers vied with each other in beauty, from top to bottom like a sea of flowers, condensed into a wall, and in the sea of flowers, a stone door towered, 5 zhang tall, 3 zhang wide, embedded into the tree trunk. The surroundings were submerged by innumerable vines and flowers, leaving only a thick, huge stone in the middle, engraved on it in ancient seal script. Celestial Emperor Treasury. Indistinctly, some kind of resonant sound reverberated in the blue sky, shaking the soul. Ghostly's gaze immediately retracted and landed in front of the stone door, in the sea of flowers, that white figure. As if hearing the movements behind her, that lady in white unhurriedly turned around. Innumerable beautiful flowers under the blue sky, suddenly as if laughing together, complimenting her exceptional beauty, proudly bloomed. In the sea of flowers, she was the most beautiful and clear color. Ghostly in the mid-air, for a moment 100 feelings welled up in his heart. He was stunned. Chapter 192. Outside the Death Marsh, leaving Dawang village and heading west on the ancient path, Taniska and Tani were walking slowly. Tani looked around with her bright eyes. The ancient path was overgrown with weeds, a stretch of desolation. After walking out of Dawang village for a long time, they did not even see a shadow of a person. Gazing afar, this place was in the wilderness. There were no mountains around. The sky was high and the grass was long. Wind blew through the fields. The green weeds were like waves rolling. It was a beautiful sight, broadening one's mind. Taniska's lazy voice came from the side, said, "What are you looking at?" Tani smiled. "Grandpa, when I came here a few days ago, because I was in a hurry, I did not look around carefully. Today the weather is good. You see, the scenery here is not bad." Taniska looked at the plain outside the ancient path. His spirit was lifted, but then he said to himself, "Isn't it just a field of wild grass? What's there to see? If it's made of gold, then it's Grandpa." Tani called out, interrupted him, glared at him, and said, "Why are you always thinking about money? Your name has the word Sien, so vulgar." "Vulgar?" Taniska was angry, said, "You dare to scold me vulgar? I am an esteemed person, famous throughout the world to give birth to Buddha, to benefit the common people and save all living beings." Tani stared at him, under his granddaughter's bright gaze. Taniska's voice became softer and softer. The more he spoke, the less confidence he had. In the end, he simply raised his head, snorted and said, "You little girl, how do you know Grandpa's power?" Tani giggled, shook her head, and looked away. Being ridiculed by his granddaughter, Taniska was depressed. He sighed. "How did I meet you? If I knew earlier, I would have let you cry to death on the roadside and not care about you." Tani stuck out her tongue. Her snow-white face looked innocent and cute, smiled. "Isn't that Grandpa's kindness?" Taniska glared at Tani, said, "Kindness my ass. I raise you up to this age. You make me angry every day." Xiao Huan was not afraid. Neither was she angry. As if she had heard these words many times, she walked to Zhou Yisian, rolled her eyes, suddenly said, "Grandpa, why did you take me away?" Zhou Yisian was startled. Actually, he and Xiao Huan had always been casual. How would he really be angry? But now that Xiao Huan asked this, some of the past was recalled. His face turned melancholy, sighed softly, and said, "That year in Heong City, I saw you, a little girl of only 2 or 3 years old, lying beside the road, dying of hunger. Even your crying was hoarse. My heart softened and carried you up." Speaking till here, he suddenly glared at Xiao Huan, said, "At that time you were still young but very smart. You actually stopped crying immediately. Made me think that we were really fated. Once this thought moved, I could not bear to part with you anymore." Tani made a face at him, stretched out her hand to pull Taniska's clothes, smiled coquettishly, and said, "Grandpa, you are doing this out of kindness. There will be good rewards in the future. Ah, you see, for these years, I have been helping you to read people's fortune. How much money have I earned for you?" Taniska subconsciously nodded, smiled happily, said, That is true." Suddenly he woke up, turned, and said angrily, "What is? Nonsense." Tani covered her mouth and laughed. After a moment, she thought of something, said, Grandpa, Then why did you go to Hyang City? Isn't that place at the foot of Mount Jadian? I remember you never want to get close to that place. Only 10 years ago, for that Jadian disciple named Shah Danan. We curiously went there, but we did not get close. Tanaska's face was a little gloomy. He sighed. Isn't it because of your father's remains? It is in Hyang City. At that time, on the day of his death, I stayed in front of his grave for a long time. When I came out, I saw you on the street. My heart was sad. I pitied you, so I adopted you. Tani was silent. After a while said, Grandpa, speaking of which, we have not visited Dad for another 10 years. Tanaska calculated in his mind, nodded. That's right, 10 years have passed in a blink of an eye. Then, smiled bitterly, said, Never mind, since we have nowhere to go, why not go to Hyang City and visit your dad? Tani immediately nodded, said okay. Tanaska waved his hand, said, Let's go, this is the wilderness, makes people feel bored. The two of them walked forward. As they walked, Xiao Huan was after all young, and those were old matters. In addition to her liveliness, she very quickly extricated herself from that slight injury. While walking, she looked around at the scenery. She unintentionally turned her head and was startled, said to her grandfather, Grandfather, look behind us. Tanaska, startled, asked curiously, What is it? Then he looked behind him. Tani said, Seems like that cynical Taoist is still following us. Tanaska looked carefully. As expected, he saw a cynical Taoist, for some reason, was following them from afar, walking slowly, always maintaining a distance from them. Now that they suddenly stopped and looked back, cynical Taoist also seemed surprised, also stopped. His face showed hesitation and a little embarrassment, then stood aside and looked up at the sky. Tanaska's face was full of suspicion, stared at him for a while, turned and pulled Tani to continue walking. At the same time, he quietly said, Why is that guy following us? Tani asked curiously. You asked me. Who should I ask? Tanaska paused, suddenly stared at Tani, and said, Don't tell me that guy is lustful and wants to do something to you. Tani was startled. Her face immediately blushed, angrily said, Grandpa, how can you say such words? Tanaska snorted, said, Why can't I say it? In this world, bad people run amok, and you are also beautiful. It is very hard to say. Tani rolled her eyes at him, said, From what I see, in the past cynical Taoist and evil sect, although his reputation is not good, but I have never heard of him harming women, but it is rumored that he has done many things like murder, arson, daylight robbery. Tanaska's face paled, immediately became nervous, said, That guy is not thinking of robbing us too, paupers, right? Xiao Huan snorted, said, Hard to say, besides, Grandpa, the silver's on you, most likely much more than a pauper. Tanaska quickly lowered his voice and said, Shh, don't talk so loudly. He looked around, frowned, and said, Oh no, there is no one here. It is the best place to rob. Let's hurry up and run. Xiao Huan was surprised, saw Tanaska took out a yellow paper from his bosom. Seemed like he was going to use his founder's secret earth-burrowing skill to escape. She couldn't help but felt angry and funny at the same time, quickly pulled Tanaska, said, Grandpa, wait a moment. Tanaska looked behind him, said, That guy is following us again. What are we waiting for? Tani smiled and said, Grandpa, although your earth-burrowing skill is a secret skill passed down by our founder, but after burrowing, you cannot control where we come out. Let me tell you, we are not far from that death marsh. If you actually burrow into it, we will really be dead. Tanaska was surprised, murmured, Our luck won't be that bad, right? Tani rolled her eyes at him, said, Do you think your luck is good or bad? Tanaska thought for a moment, then very firmly said, Bad. Xiao Huan giggled, said, Then that settles it. So we cannot take the risk. While speaking, she went closer to Zhou Yixian, signaled to her left hand, quietly said, Grandpa, you have forgotten? I still have a protective magical weapon that Pinger's sister gave me, and also that Wild Dog Taoist is not some evil sect master. It is not a difficult matter for us to deal with him. Tanaska lowered his head and pondered, then let out a long breath, said, You are right, Sai. Don't know why. These few days I have been on tenterhooks, restless. Seems like I have seen too many cultivation masters in the Death Marsh. and thought too highly of that cynical Taoist. Tani pursed her lips and smiled, said, "Moreover, that cynical Taoist doesn't seem to be a bad person. Didn't he lend us his umbrella?" Taniska snorted, said, "What us, he is lending it to you? I was drenched half to death in the rain. You this girl are actually indifferent, really unfilial." Tani stuck out her tongue, smiled, and said, "Grandpa, I have one for you. It is you who did not want it." Taniska snorted again, strode forward, said, "Anyway, you and that unfilial father of yours are the same, always making me angry, really disobedient." Tani smiled and shook her head, followed. Behind the ancient path, cynical Taoist faintly heard laughter coming from ahead, frowned, his expression changed, but eventually still followed. Between heaven and earth, the wind blew across the wilderness, making a sound of woo-woo. This walk was another half an hour. Taniska felt a little tired, pulled Tani, said, "Take a rest." Tani nodded, looked at a large blue stone by the roadside, walked over and patted it, said, "Grandpa, you sit here." Taniska nodded his head, leaned the bamboo pole with the white cloth of immortal guide on the side of the rock, sat down on the rock, couldn't help but pant, slightly shook his head, said, "Why do I feel that my body is not doing well recently? I only walked for a short distance and already started to pant." Tani was taking out a water bottle from her bag. Hearing this, a trace of worry flashed past her eyes, walked over and passed the water bottle to Taniska. At the same time said, "Grandpa, drink some water." Taniska nodded, took the water bottle, raised his head and drank a few mouthfuls, let out a long breath, then turned his head and looked back. There was really a figure standing far away. Taniska looked for a while, suddenly smiled, did not care about him, passed the water bottle to Tani. Unexpectedly, when he turned his head, Tani was sitting beside him, not knowing when, in her hand there was a bright red candied haw, eating it with relish. Taniska shook his head, said earnestly, "I say, Tani, how old are you? Why are you still like a little girl? Love this candied haw so much?" Tani spat out a small seed of the candied haw, smiled coquettishly at Taniska, said, "But I love it." Taniska was speechless, sighed. "More than 10 years ago, in that Hyang city, there were so many pastries. Why did I run to the alley to buy this candied haw for you?" Chapter 193. Finished, he shook his head and sighed. Tani smiled and did not speak, lightly tasted the food in her hand, maybe under the bright red appearance of the candied haws. Her lips also seemed to have a touch of color. Taniska sat for a while, felt his strength gradually recovered. He planned to call Tani and continue on their journey. Unexpectedly, just when he turned his head, he suddenly saw a pair of feet in front of him. Taniska was shocked, thought could it be that because of his negligence, wild dog that bastard took the chance to sneak attack. What would happen? Seems like he really cannot easily believe the little girl's words. Old man has traveled the world for more than 100 years. Don't tell me today, is the tortoise stumbling, the boat capsized in the gutter? As he was thinking, he was about to call Tani up. Suddenly the person in front of him said, gently and calmly, "Are you still reading people's fortune?" Taniska and Tani both stood up, looked up and saw a middle-aged man in front of them. Thin brows, a square face, refined features, eyes bright and full of expression, a full forehead. In his elegance there was an imposing manner without anger. A Confucian robe, at his waist a light purple jade pendant, exquisite and translucent, indistinctly had auspicious air, very beautiful, definitely not an ordinary item. Just that on his forehead and sideburns, there were many more white hairs that did not match his appearance, looked a little more vicissitudes of life. Taniska's expression suddenly became very strange. He stared at the person in front of him. Under his sleeves, his hands tightly clenched into fists, but on his face, after the shock, there was indistinctly some excitement, some gratification, and some vicissitudes of life. Tani's gaze turned from that person's face, back to her grandfather, and then found that Taniska's expression was not right. Was about to say something, Taniska suddenly said, "Tani, go to the side for a while, wait for grandfather to call you, then come back." Xiao Huan was surprised. This had never happened before, but looking at Zhou Yixian's serious face, he did not seem to be joking, and looking at their expressions, they seemed to be old acquaintances. She acknowledged, casually tidied her bag and walked towards the back. As she walked, she would occasionally look back, but her grandfather and that middle-aged man were still standing there, seemed to still not speak. She was a bit worried. This was the first time she had met that middle-aged man, but in that short moment, she didn't know why she was afraid of him. Her heart was filled with an inexplicable fear. For more than 10 years, she had always been by Tanaska's side. She never knew that her grandfather knew such a powerful person. While she was thinking, her heart was in a trance, totally unaware that she had walked for quite a distance. Suddenly she saw another figure in front of her, quickly stopped, and almost bumped into that person. Looking carefully, it was Wild Dog Taoist, quickly said, "Sorry, priest." Unexpectedly, Wild Dog Taoist's expression right now was also very strange. Shock flashed on his face, his eyes staring straight ahead, full of fear. Xiao Huan was shocked again, followed his gaze and saw that Wild Dog was also looking at that middle-aged man. Who was that person to make Wild Dog Taoist so afraid? Xiao Huan thought, couldn't help but quietly asked Wild Dog Taoist, "Priest, who is that person? Do you know him?" Wild Dog Taoist's body shook, seemed to regain his senses, but the fear on his face was still not reduced. Looked at Xiao Huan beside him, stammered, "You don't know him?" Xiao Huan nodded and said, "Yes, today is also the first time I see this person, but I saw that grandfather seems to know him." "Oh right, do you know him? Who is he?" Wild Dog Taoist's lips moved, seemed to want to say something, but for some reason, he suddenly became silent, his eyes staring straight at that middle-aged man. Xiao Huan frowned, instinctively felt that Wild Dog Taoist's reaction was strange. There was fear, and right now, there seemed to be some anger. Tanaska and that middle-aged man stood side by side, stood beside the ancient path, gazing into the wilderness. A breeze blew over, the white hair at the temples, as if narrating the years, the vicissitudes of the human world. "We haven't met for many years, right?" That middle-aged man suddenly indifferently said. Tanaska looked afar, his expression complicated. After a long while he said, "Should be several decades." That man smiled faintly, said, "Are you still well?" Tanaska was silent for a long time, said, "Roaming the world, enjoying the human world, can't say good, can't say bad either." That man seemed to be touched, turned and looked at Tanaska, said, "Are you still blaming me in your heart?" Tanaska gave a wry smile, shook his head and said, "You have not wronged me. Why should I blame you?" That man smiled and said, "Actually, it is not bad for you to be like this. Open your heart, roam the world. Now thinking about it, it is also a celestial life. It is not in vain that your name has the word celestial." Tanaska looked at him, suddenly said, "If you want to live like me, what's the difficulty, old friend?" That man suddenly heard Tanaska calling him old friend, couldn't help but was surprised, but then smiled, looked afar, slowly said, "I am different from you." Tanaska said indifferently, "Of course you are different from me. Since your youth, you have always attached great importance to power. Until now, I guess you still can't let it go." That man frowned, anger flashed deep in his eyes, as if no one dared to speak to him like this. But when he looked back at Tanaska, he saw that Tanaska had a head full of white hair, much older than him. Suddenly lost, the anger also disappeared. "Why do you look so old?" Tanaska shook his head, said, "I am old, but you have cultivated Tao. You shouldn't." "Here," he hesitated, but finally said, "I heard about your daughter." That man's face turned gloomy, then slowly shook his head, stopped Tanaska's words, suddenly said, "When we were still young, you used big diviner divination at the foot of majestic Fox Mountain to tell my fate. Do you still remember?" Tanaska startled. That man looked up at the sky, slowly said, "I still remember clearly. You were young and full of vigor. You told me everything, said my fate's baleful energy was too strong, punish my wife and children. If there is no way to solve it, I will lose my wife and children." Now it really came true. As he spoke, his voice gradually became bleak. Tanaska lowered his head, after a while, suddenly raised his head, said resolutely, "Now we are also people with half a foot in the grave. I also have something to tell you." That man was slightly surprised, said, "Speak." Tanaska stared at him, said, "What I said at that time, it was all nonsense to deceive you. Since young, Lousy hated those fortune-telling things. How would I have the patience to learn? As for that big diviner divination, of course there is such a saying, but how would I know? So what I said at that time was just because I saw your proud face, I couldn't bear it. Don't keep it in your heart. That man's body shook, as if he never thought that Taniska would say such words. After a while, he suddenly shook his head and laughed. His laughter was loud and clear. In the end, he laughed so hard that he bent down. Where was the dignity he had when they first met? At a distance, Tani and Wild Dog Taoist were dumbfounded. After a while, that man slowly stopped laughing. His expression gradually returned to calmness and dignity. But in his eyes, there seemed to be more traces of bitterness. Taniska silently looked at him. They stood side by side for a long time. Behind them, Taniska indifferently said, "Why are you here?" That man glanced at him, said, "Aren't you always proud of your intelligence? What do you think?" Taniska snorted, said, "You're going to Death Marsh, right?" That man leisurely said, "Yes, I'm going there." "Why? Don't you want to have a look, old friend?" Taniska's lips curled, said, "Your reputation is too bad. If I walk with you, it will be strange. It's better for me to stay away from you." That man looked at Taniska, suddenly laughed, and said, "World's Edge ancient path, to be able to meet an old friend, it is considered a rare fate. You and I have met today. Don't know when we will meet again. You take care." Taniska snorted, said, "I am living well. I don't want to die, but your enemies are more than the foxes on majestic Fox Mountain. Better think of yourself." Tani stood by the roadside waiting for a long time, suddenly saw her grandfather and that man walking over, quickly went up to her grandfather. That middle-aged man glanced at Tani, and then at Wild Dog Taoist behind her. Wild Dog's countenance changed, slowly lowered his head. That man glanced at him, suddenly said, "You are the Wild Dog Taoist beside Ghostly?" The fear on Wild Dog's face deepened, hesitated for a moment, then quietly said, "Yes." Tani stood beside Taniska, couldn't help but softly asked, "Grandfather, who is he?" Taniska had not answered. That middle-aged man seemed to have heard this little voice, turned, smiled, and said, "Why, little girl, don't know me?" Tani was surprised, blankly shook her head. That man smiled and said, "You can call me Wanren Wong." Tani was surprised. That man looked deeply at Taniska, suddenly waved his sleeve, turned and strode away, without even turning back. Striding out, there was an imposing manner that looked down on the world, slowly spread out. The crowd behind him saw that figure walking along the ancient path towards the direction of Death Marsh. Suddenly that man was singing loudly, "The road to the ends of the earth is never far. Love has always been infatuated. High sky and wide sea, 80,000 zhong. All living beings prostrate themselves. 10,000 stars, the moon bright, heaven cold, cold like frost. Laughable, all living beings are like straw dogs. Who overturns the rain? Who overturns the clouds?" The voice was simple, although it was not gentle and pleasant to listen to, but in the desolation, there was a forcefulness. The crowd saw that under the heaven, on the ancient path, drifting white clouds, in the silent wilderness, that man clasped his hands behind his back as he walked, an unspeakable arrogance. The voice gradually faded. That man was already far away. Chapter 194. The wind blew. Innumerable flowers swayed together. Lu Sweki expressionlessly stood in the sea of flowers, quietly watching Ghostly, who had landed opposite her. A faint fragrance quietly floated. Ghostly gently shrugged his shoulders. Xiao Hui leapt down from his shoulder, widened its eyes and looked at its master, then glanced at Lu Sweki, scratched its head, and ran to one side. Ghostly's eyes landed on that lofty stone door behind Lu Sweki, suddenly smiled and said, "This is what we are looking for." Lu Sweki stood in front of the stone door, did not smile, and did not speak. Only her face looked pale, not knowing what exactly she was thinking. Ghostly slowly walked up, indifferently said, "I want the thing inside." Chonglang. Tianya's celestial sword like autumn water, laid horizontally between him and her, reflecting their figures, gently swaying. Ghostly stopped. Lu Sweki slowly raised her head. Her face, as pale as frost, looked more like a fairy from the ninth heaven, elegant and beautiful. Even the words that she spoke carried a bone-chilling coldness. "I will not let this treasure fall into the hands of the evil sect and harm more innocent people." Ghostly looked at her, deeply looked at her. That girl was still as beautiful and cold as before. The years did not leave any trace on her. Just that. What about her heart? He had already changed. Deep in this girl's heart. Had it also changed? He suddenly laughed out, but in his laughter, his eyes slowly turned cold. He smiled and said, "Is that so? That's unfortunate. I'm going to take this unknown treasure and then go kill more people." Lou Swecky's body trembled slightly, stared at this man in front of her, and did not speak again. Only holding Tianya's hand tightened. Far away, suddenly a faint roar was heard. That sound came from deep within the mist, seemed to be very far away, like the roar of some wild beast. After a moment, both of them felt at the same time, this towering tree under their feet. Suddenly a slight tremble came from the trunk. Ghost Lee and Lou Swecky's countenance changed at the same time. This strange tree was unimaginably huge. It was even bigger than ordinary mountains, not to mention shaking this tree. Even the thought of shaking it was inconceivable. However, what kind of people were the two of them? How could the movement beneath their feet be hidden from them? It was clear that there was a huge change in the fog beneath their feet. They did not know what kind of powerful force could actually shake this tree. With that thought, both of them were quick-witted people and thought that this unforeseen event was most likely related to the Celestial Emperor treasury in front of them. It was also at this moment that the first ray of sunlight from the horizon shone on the sea of flowers about 3 feet in front of the stone door. Ghost Lee's body moved and was about to make a move, but Lou Swecky's bright eyes glimmered. Tianya's celestial sword held horizontally in front of her chest, blocking in front of the Celestial Emperor treasury stone door. Ghost Lee's eyes froze. A faint red light seemed to flash in his eyes. In a deep voice he said, "I am not willing to fight with you. You move aside." Lou Swecky looked straight into his eyes, without the slightest intention of backing down, indifferently said, "If you kill me, naturally you will pass." The red light in Ghost Lee's eyes brightened. Suddenly a long howl. He flew up. Dark green light shone brightly around him, his momentum swift and fierce. Lou Swecky's face was as cold as ice. Tianya's sword rose into the air, suddenly coldly said, "You have already entered the evil way. Why do you still need to use Qinyan's sex skills?" Ghostly was in the air. The sinister orb in front of the soul-absorbing stick in his hand glowed brightly. Even his eyes were red. His baleful aura surged. He shouted, "So what if Qinyan's sex skills? So what if evil sect evil skills? I usually use them to kill people. What about you?" In the sharp whistling sound, that stretch of red light mingled with the clear light, struck down from above. A flash of anger flashed past Lou Swecky's eyes. She did not give way at all. Tianya's celestial sword forcibly met in the air. The two supreme treasures collided with a loud bang. Rumble. A loud sound. Ghostly's body leapt up. Lou Swecky, who was on the tree trunk, involuntarily retreated a few steps. Her face also turned pale. But this cold girl frowned. Her body followed the sword up, with Tianya's celestial sword in her chest as the center. Resplendent blue light immediately spread out. She and the sword light looked even more beautiful. "That battle 10 years ago, I lost." She in the air stared at Ghostly, word by word slowly said. At the same time, Tianya's celestial sword was activated by her own skills. The blue light became more and more intense, as if even the sunlight in the sky was forced back by her. 10 years later, I will consult you again, the only person who has gathered Buddhism, Taoism, evil, 3 families' true ways. Ghostly laughed loudly and said, "Your memory is really good." Speaking without hesitation, the soul-absorbing stick suddenly rotated in front of him. Waves of clear light. His left hand continuously drew strange patterns. Instantly, a dazzling clear light Taiji diagram appeared. It was the authentic Qinyan sect Taiji Xin Qing Wei magic. Lou Swecky saw it. Her face turned even colder. A clear whistle. Tianya's celestial sword light glowed brightly. With a turn of her wrist, Tianya immediately seemed to grow 10 times longer, slashed towards Ghostly. Ghostly's countenance changed slightly. He himself had also painstakingly trained in this Tai Ji Xin Qing way. Just based on the power of Lou Swecky's sword, he knew that in these 10 years, her skills had advanced by leaps and bounds. At that time, among Qin Yun's sect's younger generation, There was no one who could easily condense Tai Ji Xianqing Wei with such pure sword light. The power was so great when he was young, when he saw his teacher Tian Bui teaching Kaheo a lesson, and at that time Tian Bai's attainment in Tai Ji Xianqing Wei had already reached Shangqing realm. And right now Lu Sueki casually slashed over, the sword light like a mountain, the blue light as sharp as a knife. The force could topple the mountains and overturn the seas. Compared to Tian Bui at that time, the speed of her improvement in these 10 years was really unimaginable. Just that although Lu Sueki's aptitude was astonishing, but Ghostly possessed 3 school skills. In these 10 years of hard training, how would it be ordinary? Right now, Ghostly facing that mountain-like sword light, both of his arms shook. The Taiji diagram in front of him suddenly rotated rapidly, swiftly enlarged, shielding his chest. See, a sharp sound was heard, as if the indestructible sword gleam was blocked by the Tai Chi pattern. But the blue light became stronger, the clear light flickered, the brilliant grand light shone between the two of them. It was very beautiful, but everyone knew that if they were not careful, they would be hit by this sword gleam that contained the great power of Taoism. If not dead, they would be injured. In the light, Ghostly exhaled a muffled sound. Tianya's celestial sword flew back, and after the Taiji diagram flashed a few times, it disappeared in the air. Ghostly snorted, looked at Lu Sueki, a faint admiration in his eyes, but then it was overshadowed by the red light, said, really powerful. Only used 10 years, and you can actually break through Shangqing realm. Most likely even Qingyi founder at that time was not as powerful as you. Lu Sueki stood in the air, her clothes fluttering, a sword gesture in her hand. Tianya's sword immediately stopped. The blue light shone again, even brighter than before. At the same time, she was secretly surprised. These 10 years, her cultivation was radical, although it was because of her outstanding aptitude, but more importantly, it was because she trained extremely hard. Could almost be described as excessive as to why she trained so recklessly. Even her master Shuiwa master could not bear to watch and advise her many times. The reason was not something outsiders could understand. However, this kind of arduous cultivation, in addition to her outstanding talent, finally allowed her to be the first to break through to the prime, clear realm among the younger generation of the Azure Cloud sect. In the past 1,000 years, she was the fastest person to reach this realm apart from Ancestor Greenleaf. With her current cultivation level, in Qinyan's sect, other than the various elders, she would be the leader. Even Xiao Yikai, who had always been known as the number 1 among the young disciples in the sect, would most likely be slightly inferior to her. But, even so, Ghostly, who fought with her just now, this ordinary Jadian disciple called Zhang Xiaofan, his cultivation was not any weaker than her. That hand that metamorphosed Tai Chi diagram was skillful and experienced, blocked her Shangqing realm cultivation. Hidden energy surged, layers upon layers, strong and solid, seemed to be a Buddhist sect, but looking at the spell he cast, it was clearly Tai Chi Xianqing Wei's hand gesture incantation. This man, finally also on the path of cultivation, walked a path that no one before him had walked. Both of them looked at each other, their eyes gradually sharpened and brightened, but at this moment, suddenly an extremely loud roar came from the mist. This sound was so fierce and loud. Even with Ghostly and Lu Sueki's cultivation, they also felt slightly dizzy, and almost at the same time, the tree trunk under their feet suddenly shook violently. Like the originally thick ground suddenly shook violently, similar to an earthquake. ZZ, ZZ. A scream. It was the monkey Xiao Hui who was crouching beside the Celestial Emperor Treasury stone door, was startled by the sudden vibration. While grabbing onto the vines beside the stone door, it cried out. Without waiting for Ghostly and Lu Sueki to react, from the direction where this enormous tree trunk came from, suddenly 4 figures appeared, swiftly flying over, 1 person in front, 3 behind. In a blink of an eye they had arrived nearby. Lu Sueki and Ghostly looked over and were startled. And the 4 of them who had been chasing suddenly realized that there was someone ahead of them. They were also shocked and could not help but stopped. These 4 people were all familiar. The one in front was a charming young lady. It was evil sect He Huan's sect Jean Pinger, and following behind her were the good faction people. Not only Lu Sueki knew them, even Ghostly also knew them. Fa Xiang, Zheng Shu Shu, and also the one who stopped in shock. His eyes never left Ghostly, Lin Jingyu. Chapter 195. The scene suddenly quietened down. Ghostly's eyes looked at them. Fa Xiang and the rest's faces revealed a complicated expression, like joy, like surprise. All kinds of expressions flashed past. Jean Pinger's eyes swept across the scene. With Ghostly's position and power in Ghost King's sect, his background, Jean Pinger naturally knew it like the back of her hand. Towards Ghostly and the good faction people's past entanglements, she more or less knew a little. Right now, looking at the situation, she hesitated slightly, quietly moved towards Ghostly, stood together with him. Over at the good faction side, Fa Xiang and Anan saw Jean Pinger's movements, frowned at the same time, but still did not speak. The one who broke the silence was instead Bei, who was standing at the back. In his eyes, right now, he could not see Jean Pinger's figure. Only Zhang Xiaofan was standing in front of him. He slowly took a few steps forward. The corner of his mouth twitched. Even speaking seemed to be a little difficult. "You, are you still well?" Ghostly slowly looked away, no longer looked at him. Facing Bei, for some reason, suddenly he did not dare to look at his childhood friend's eyes. Bei looked at Ghost Li's expression. His expression became even more agitated. His words seemed to be hoarse. "Xiaofan, you." Ghost Li's body shook, could not help but raise his head. Reflected in his eyes was that familiar face. Right now, there was no trace of enmity, only excitement and joy. "Jingyu," he said bitterly. Bei had been training in Jade Hill Founder's ancestral hall for the past 10 years. He had imagined the scene of him and Zhang Xiaofan meeting again countless times. He also kept asking himself, facing Zhang Xiaofan, who had already turned into a demon, how should he face him? Was it good and evil being irreconcilable, draw the sword to decide life and death, or earnestly persuading him to return to the good faction? But when they finally met again today, he could not say a single word. The scenes of the past quietly surfaced in his heart. In the end, it was clearly not Xinyan Hill, not riding the sword and flying, not traversing the heaven and earth, but two childhood friends in that dilapidated temple, running and laughing. Time is like sand. Has it ever worn away the most precious thing in your heart? His childhood friend, his former brother, was standing in front of him 10 years later. Taking a step forward, Lin Jingyu's face showed unprecedented agitation. Even Ghost Li seemed to be moved, his body trembling slightly. Perhaps, in Ghost Li's heart, he was just as excited. Jean Pinger, who was standing beside Ghost Li, frowned slightly. She was naturally not interested in the relationship between the two brothers, but looking at the situation. The good faction seemed to have the advantage in numbers. If something happened to Ghost Li, she would inevitably be alone. He coughed once, smiled, and said, "Ah, Ghostly Gongzi, I didn't expect you to arrive here earlier than us. I wonder if you have obtained that rare treasure?" Once the words were said, Lin Jingyu and Ghost Li's body shook. Fa Xiang and Zheng Shu looked at Lu Sueki at the same time. Lu Sueki slowly shook her head. Then they were relieved. A simple question suddenly pulled them back to reality. Ghostly closed his eyes slightly. After a moment, when he opened them again, there was an indistinct red glint. His gaze also turned sharp. He looked deeply at Lin Jingyu, finally turned his head, no longer looking at him. He took a step back, stood shoulder to shoulder with Jean Pinger. Jean Pinger smiled, her eyes like water. The ripples in her eyes seemed to be sprinkled on Ghostly, gently said, "Are you all right?" Ghostly snorted, "We will temporarily cooperate. How about it?" Jean Pinger immediately said, "All right, after this we will talk." Ghostly glanced at her, nodded. In just a short while, the two of them could already tell that the situation was not easy, therefore decided to join forces. Ghostly indifferently said, "Doesn't your Hehuan sect have many highly skilled disciples? Why is it that only you entered the inner march alone, and instead they gained the upper hand?" Jean Pinger glanced at Fa Xiang and the rest. Her face actually slightly blushed. Looking even more lovable, softly said, "Our Hehuan sect is only a small sect. I am afraid that if I bring a few more in, those people outside will suddenly die without knowing why." She smiled and glanced at Ghostly, said, "Instead, Ghost King's sect has always been a place of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. Why is it that other than a gray-haired monkey, there is no one else beside Master? Ghostly heard the indistinct sarcasm in her words, indifferently said, Everyone is the same. If I bring a few more talents in, I'm afraid the people outside will be swallowed by your Hehuan sect and Wandu clan. This time the evil faction's three main branches came to the west on a large scale. On the surface, they were working together to destroy Changshan Hall, but in the dark they were scheming against each other, guarding against each other. As a result, the three main branches were restraining each other and did not dare to use all of their highly skilled disciples. Instead, the good faction took advantage of them. Issa stood at a distance. His heart was also quite excited. At that time on Xinyun Hill, he and Zhang Xiaofan had always been good friends. Other than Bei, he was Zhang Xiaofan's best friend. But the affairs of the world made fools of people. It turned out to be like this. His heart couldn't help but feel pained. He had the intention to speak to Ghostly, regardless if it would be useful or not. He wanted to let this friend return to the right path. But in a blink, his eyes landed on Jean Pinger's face. Suddenly his heart jumped. He felt that the girl's face was like a peach blossom, extremely flirtatious, a pair of bright and limpid eyes like pools of water. That gaze seemed to be able to speak, staring at him. He took a few glances, immediately felt a boom in his head. As if he was drunk, he only wanted to be drunk into that girl's eyes, could not help but took a step forward. "Do!" Suddenly, a shout, like the evening drum and morning bell, rang in his ears. Fazan's white moon monk robe flashed, suddenly appeared in front of him, blocked Jean Pinger's sight, at the same time faced Issa's evil vanquishing roar. Zheng Shu was startled and then regained his senses. In a short moment he was drenched in cold sweat. He thanked Xiang incessantly. In his heart he secretly cursed, this evil which is really scary. Xiang's face was solemn, turned and stared at Jean Pinger. Before she came up, Jean Pinger had already fought with these few people, knew that although this monk looked young, but his Tian Temple Buddhism cultivation was really outstanding. Her bewitching skill did not seem to have any effect on him. Most likely this person's mental fortitude was too deep and was not afraid of such external disturbances. She smiled and did not speak. Fazan frowned, then his eyes landed on Zhang Xiaofan. Facing Zhang Xiaofan, his expression was not so calm. On his peaceful and compassionate face, there was a hint of guilt, hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, Zhang Shitty. Ghostly suddenly cut him off coldly. My name is Ghostly, no other name. Fezan paused. Issa couldn't help but shouted, Xiaofan, don't be like this. We always thought you are. Fezan suddenly waved his hand, stopped Issa's words, at the same time said quietly, Tsing Shitty, there are some things you cannot say. If your Jade and elders know about it, there will be trouble. Zheng Shu was taken aback, looked at Ghostly in front of him, and eventually kept quiet. Fezan turned around, seemed like he still wanted to say something to Ghostly, but at this moment, suddenly the giant tree trunk under everyone's feet shook violently again. The shaking this time was much stronger than the previous time. Everyone could see the tree trunk was shaking in the air, at the same time could not stand still. Most of them staggered a few steps. Everyone's face turned pale. At the same time, another sky-shaking roar was suddenly emitted from the depths of the dense fog below. It sounded like a ferocious beast was roaring towards the sky. That invisible sound wave actually transformed into a ferocious giant wind that surged upwards from below, causing everyone's clothes to flutter. And in the roar, a strange hissing sound was heard, like a poisonous snake slithering, also like rope rubbing against each other, reverberated between heaven and earth, louder and louder, nearer and nearer. Jean Pinger suddenly cried out, Oh no, it's that beast, it actually came up. Everyone present, other than Ghostly and Lu Sweki, all turned pale. Ghostly abruptly turned his head and saw Jean Pinger's face was slightly pale. He couldn't help but was shocked, although he was more of an enemy than a friend, but he also knew that Jean Pinger was not someone to be underestimated, and in the battle to annihilate Changshan Hall a few days ago, this girl's words and laughter, her thoughts were meticulous and her methods vicious. She was really not an easy person to deal with. But at this moment, there seemed to be some fear on her face. In the air, a stench suddenly appeared, accompanied by that gradually growing louder, like the devil's footsteps trampling on their hearts. The hissing sound became more and more intense. "What is this?" Ghostly had only asked halfway and suddenly stopped, his eyes staring straight ahead. Then, he subconsciously looked to the side. There Lou Swecky, in white as snow, for some reason, also looked over at him. In the clear sky, the direction where the huge branches extended over, where there were some clouds, suddenly like two huge balls of flames. Dark green flames. In the flames, there were two slender vertical deep eyes, glinting with cold light. The stench in the air suddenly intensified, making one want to vomit. Ghostly, for some reason, his body trembled slightly. After a long while, he watched that huge beast slowly becoming clear, slowly appearing, that inconceivable huge beast with a hoarse voice, as if reverberating in the past years, using a voice that only he could hear, muttered, "Blackwater mystical snake, Blackwater mystical snake." Chapter 196. The tree trunk shook even more violently. Even this incredible towering tree, under the Blackwater mystical viper's enormous body, also seemed to be trembling. As if it was a ferocious beast from ancient times, the Blackwater mystical viper used its enormous snake body to wrap around the tree trunk. Wherever it passed, the branches and leaves were in a mess, those vines and flowers all withered and shattered. It shook its head and wagged its tail as it moved forward. Those humans in front of it, right now, were like ants, not worth a mention. Lou Swecky's face appeared slightly pale. She took a step forward, her eyes still staring at that ancient beast which was getting closer and closer. She whispered to Zheng Shushu, who was beside her. "What happened?" Sweat appeared on Zheng Shushu's forehead. He said, "Just now when we were down there, we suddenly met this terrible beast. With our meager skills, naturally we could only run. But at that time it did not seem to care about us, and seemed to be searching for something and left very quickly. I didn't expect it actually climbed up." Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Even though everyone present here was a person that had achieved success in the Tao and was far from being comparable to mortals in the world, there was a limit to one's strength. Especially before this extremely terrifying enormous beast, any form of resistance was laughable. At the critical juncture, when the Blackwater mystical viper was getting closer, Jean Pinger suddenly said, "Oh no, this beast most likely is also here for the things in the Celestial Emperor treasury." Everyone's countenance changed. Ghostly frowned slightly, his face expressionless, but in his heart he suddenly recalled that when he just entered the Death Marsh's inner marsh, he once met an unimaginably huge beast in the miasma. Because of the miasma, he did not see it clearly, but from then on, he felt a faint familiarity with the unique fishy smell around him. Now it seemed that the beast he met that day was actually this Blackwater mystical viper. The Blackwater mystical viper continued to advance, the enormous black body pressing the tree trunk until it trembled incessantly, almost making one worry if the tree trunk would be crushed by it. And in the mid-air, that enormous snake head, under its fangs, its bright red forked tongue kept on stretching in and out, facing the direction of the Celestial Emperor treasury, hissing softly, as if it was very excited. At this moment, everyone could tell that this enormous beast target was indeed behind them, the things in the Celestial Emperor treasury. Ghostly turned his head and looked towards the Celestial Emperor treasury. The thick and solid stone door still did not move an inch. The sunlight, which originally only shone on the sea of flowers in front of the stone door, had now shifted onto the door. The four ancient seal characters Celestial Emperor treasury glimmered under the sunlight. Fa Xiong looked at the huge body of the serpent that looked like a small hill coming closer and closer. He sighed and quickly turned to the others and said, "This Blackwater mystical serpent is an ancient demonic beast. It is not something that humans can fight against. We are definitely not its opponent. Let's not force it and leave quickly." Everyone knew this logic. Zheng Shushu, Lin Jingyu, and the rest all nodded. Jean Pinger snorted, clearly unwilling, but looking at her expression, she still prepared to leave. Everyone at the scene wielded their magical weapons and prepared to disperse. Ghostly's hand also slowly lit up with dark green light. He turned his head and was about to call out to Xiao Hui, who was still hiding near the stone door, when at this moment, suddenly, above the Celestial Emperor treasury stone door, a dull rumble was heard. Right now, it was the sunlight from the horizon, shining on the top horizontal line of the Celestial Emperor treasury for ancient seal characters heaven. Roar! Almost at the same time, the black water mystical serpent suddenly increased its speed, hissing and swiftly crawled up. Everyone was shocked for a moment. Jean Pinger, Zhang Shu, Lin Jingyu, Fa Xiang and the rest were the first to fly up. In the air, a fishy smell assailed the nostrils. A strong gust of wind blew from somewhere, blowing on their faces like knives. Ghostly suddenly turned around and flew towards the Celestial Emperor treasury. Fa Xiang and the rest who were already in midair were greatly shocked. Looking back, the black water mystical serpent seemed to be enraged. Its huge eyes were wide open, and there seemed to be traces of black gas spurting out from its mouth. The huge serpent's body kept on twisting, and in a blink, it was already in front of the Celestial Emperor treasury. The enormous Celestial Emperor treasury stone door in front of the humans. Right now, it looked like it was only the size of the black water mystical serpent's head. Ghostly was in midair when he felt the darkness behind him suddenly dimmed. That mountain-like darkness was charging towards him like an avalanche. Without looking back, he knew that the black water mystical serpent's huge body was right behind him. He transformed into a stream of green light. In front of this huge beast, like lightning, dashed towards that stone door. Ahead, the monkey Xiao Hui suddenly screamed. A black shadow crashed down. The enormous wind was so swift and fierce before it touched his body. It had already blown Ghost Li's body to the side. Ghostly was greatly shocked, but he was no longer that youth in Forsaken Abyss that year. His thoughts moved instantly. As if he had grown eyes at the back of his head, he rode the soul-absorbing stick and dodged the black water mystical serpent's body by a hair's breadth. Right now, the sound on the Celestial Emperor treasury stone door gradually became louder and accompanied by a rumble. Under the sunlight, the huge stone door, which was originally a complete piece, suddenly cracked open a crack in the middle and then slowly shifted to the side. Golden, dazzling light from that crack gushed out with a loud bang. Even though it was daytime, it was still so resplendent that one could not look at it directly. Even the sun, which was slowly rising in the horizon, right now seemed to have turned dim and lightless. As if something was roaring in the Celestial Emperor treasury, rumbling in the golden light. The black water mystical serpent's huge body suddenly stretched taut and straightened, making an earth-shattering roar. Disregarding everything else, its huge snake head directly charged towards the Celestial Emperor treasury stone door. And between it and the stone door, that stream of green light seemed to be a step ahead of it and was about to enter the Celestial Emperor treasury, if there was not that Tianya celestial sword which was as bright as autumn water. A blue light screen unknowingly reached Ghost Li's head, condensed into an enormous light sword and struck down towards him. The red light in Ghost Li's eyes flourished. The stone door was right in front of him, but if he did not block this resplendent sword light, most likely he would be chopped into two on the spot. Forced to do so, the green light reversed and faced the sky. The blue-green light collided violently with the black shadow, which was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws behind him. Instantly, an invisible air wave flew out in all directions. Even Jean Pinger and the rest who were flying in the air could not help but change countenance. Even though the power was immense, but to the black water mystical serpent and that strange golden light in the Celestial Emperor treasury, they were not affected at all. The golden light was still dazzling and became more and more intense. The black water mystical serpent also charged over. This man and woman, in the perilous state of violent changes on both sides, they still persisted strenuously, neither of them willing to give in, until the light from their respective magical weapons had overshadowed their bodies. Both of their faces also turned paler and paler, but the most important thing was, in this split second, the enormous black shadow charged before them. The humans' cultivation magical weapons, the powers stimulated from their bodies, under the black water mystical serpent's agitated collision, vanished into thin air. Lu Sweki and Ghostly flew out at the same time. Ghostly felt the blood in his chest was in turmoil. His mind was buzzing. All the meridians in his body were almost completely overturned by the black water mystical serpent's great force. A mouthful of blood stuck in his chest, if not for Tian En Temple's great Brahmin wisdom, in his body protecting his heart meridians and at the same time urgently circulating. Dissipating the external force layer by layer, most likely he would have spat out blood on the spot. But even so, he still felt intense pain all over his body. Not knowing how many of his bones were broken, in the air he suddenly forced himself to turn his head and looked at Lou Swecky. That cold girl, right now, seemed to be in an even worse state, her clothes as white as snow. At her chest area, bloodstains, pale cheeks, and lips, blood kept flowing out. Seemed like she had spat out blood on the spot. Although Qin Yun's Sek's skills were marvelous, but in terms of stabilizing the heart meridians and protecting one's body, Buddhism's great Brahmin wisdom was still a notch better. The good faction people who stopped in the air were dumbstruck. This happened in a flash. Before they could react, Lou Swecky had already blocked Ghostly, and the next moment both of them were sent flying by the Blackwater mystical serpent at the same time. Looking at their bodies, most likely they were seriously injured. Lou Swecky was a Qin Yun disciple. Needless to say, Ghostly was Zhang Xiaofan. His relationship with the people present was even deeper. With this sudden change, the good faction people reacted and immediately flew down. Although they could not stop the Blackwater mystical serpent, this ancient demonic beast, but they still hoped to be able to lend a helping hand to the two of them. At the same time, Jean Pinger also quietly flew down from the other side, but under the Blackwater mystical serpent's shadow. Her pair of beautiful eyes only stare at the resplendent golden light in the Celestial Emperor Treasury stone door, her bright eyes gleaming. Far away, the rising sun rose a little higher. Under the sunlight, from the horizontal Tian character in the Celestial Emperor Treasury, it moved up a little. Suddenly, the 3-chi wide stone door, which was half opened, suddenly stopped moving, and after a moment, it actually started to close up, and the golden light inside also gradually dimmed. Ghostly's body felt like it was splitting, but Lou Swecky, both of them were still conscious. Just that the force of the Blackwater mystical serpent's attack was really too strong. In his haste, he was unable to control his body and looked like he was about to crash into the solid and thick stone door with the current speed. Even if he had Buddhism, Taoism, evil three families' true ways to protect himself, most likely he would still be smashed into pieces. What was even more frightening was that stone door, with a deep muffled sound, gradually closed up. Chapter 197. Far away, as if in midair, came Bay and others' exclamation. Ghostly's heart, at that moment, suddenly dazed. Indistinctly, there seemed to be a girl in water-green dress, under the blue sky, smiling at him. But her smile, for some reason, was a little blurry. Time, at this moment, seemed to have slowed down. His body flipped in the air. He saw the ferocious-looking black water, mystical viper behind him. He saw the hard stone door that was slowly closing in front of him. He also saw the white-clothed woman beside him, who was also floating in the air out of control. He suddenly wanted to ask Anan, for what reason she risked her life to stop him? Gigi. As if a scream suddenly rang beside his ear, the monkey Xiao Hui's voice startled him. Xiao Hui had unknowingly run to the stone door's crack, anxiously jumping nonstop, screaming loudly, and right now, the distance between the stone door's crack was already less than 2 chi. Seeing, he was about to hit the stone door. Seeing, he was about to finish this life. Seeing, the blue sky and white clouds were pressing down on him. Give up, he gritted his teeth, used his last bit of strength, twisted his body a little bit. At that moment, he saw from the corner of his eyes that gap was facing him. Perhaps he could escape from the gates of hell. He let out a sigh of relief. His whole body was like dying, without a trace of strength. The wind was biting cold, but he suddenly felt someone was watching him. He raised his eyes. Anan, without knowing when, had already woken up, was beside him. Looking at the direction she was flying, she was definitely going to hit the hard stone door. But, for some reason, on this beautiful girl's face, there was not the slightest fear. At this moment of dizziness, at this moment of life and death, her body involuntarily flew to death, but on her face, there was not a trace of sorrow, not a trace of fear. Like a flower in the night, in the crimson blood dotted her figure, in the distant screams, in front of Ghostly, no, in front of Shaw Dannon, she suddenly smiled. The pale smile had a gentleness that had never appeared before. In such a biting cold wind, her lips gently opened and closed, gazing at the person beside her. There were 4 words that passed through the wind, through the blood, and even more so through the years. They lingered in his ears, and reverberated in the depths of his heart. "You come back." She closed her eyes and her body seemed to suddenly sink. She watched as she was about to leave him. It was as though the last of her strength had disappeared along with those 4 words. Her black hair fluttered in the wind, slightly covering one side of her fair face. The woman floated in the wind, but there seemed to be a faint smile on her lips. But what was it that was reverberating in the depths of his heart with such blazing agitation? It was like a surging flood that broke through all obstacles. Even if everything in the world could disappear at this moment, that white figure. How could he give up? How could he give it up? A low and hoarse roar came from his throat. In the inexplicable tears, he struggled. In the fierce wind, he struggled. He stretched out his hand, stretched out his hand, stretched out his hand, tightly, hold on. Just like 10 years ago, beside Forsaken Abyss, in the rain of rocks, that white-attired woman disregarded everything and ran to him, grabbed his hand. Tightly, hold on, before his last bit of consciousness disappeared. He used all his strength to pull that woman towards him. In front, there was only one she of stone door gap left, and the golden light in the stone door had completely disappeared, leaving only darkness. There was a faint warmth in his palm. He closed his eyes. The endless darkness, just like 10 years ago, drowned over, swallowed them. The stone door closed with a loud crash. At that last moment, Xiao Hui also followed its master and entered. And following that, this enormous stone door closed again with a loud sound. That gap in the middle also inconceivably disappeared. Rumble. The Blackwater mystical viper's enormous snake head smashed onto the stone door. The tremendous force was like an avalanche. The several zhang's thick, enormous tree trunk also shook violently, as if it was about to break. The Blackwater mystical viper, like seeing the delicacy that was about to reach its mouth, flew away again and fell into an uncontrollable rage. The enormous snake head started to crazily smash onto the stone door. The force was so great that even the people in the sky far away also changed countenance. Jean Pinger hatefully flew up, distanced herself from that Blackwater mystical viper. She cursed incessantly in her heart. Just now, when the good faction people were not paying attention, she secretly followed the Blackwater mystical viper from the other side and approached the Celestial Emperor Treasury. She initially wanted to wait for an opportunity to enter, but unexpectedly the situation took a turn for the worse. The Celestial Emperor Treasury, for some reason, suddenly closed again. Jean Pinger was a step late. She was furious, but there was nothing she could do. And right now, in the Blackwater mystical viper's rage, its attention had already started to shift to the people in the sky. Jean Pinger saw this beast raising its head and seemed to have some unusual movements. She quickly retreated another several zhongs. As expected, the Blackwater mystical viper suddenly opened its mouth wide and spat out a gush of black venom towards the people in the sky. The fishy smell assailed the nostrils and made one want to vomit. The good faction people hurriedly dodged, and for a moment they were in a sorry state. Jean Pinger dodged faster and was considered calm. But looking at the Blackwater mystical viper roaring furiously, and then using its head to hit the Celestial Emperor Treasury stone door with all its might, she guessed that she would not be able to gain any advantage today. If she continued to wait, the good faction people would instead become hostile towards her. She might as well leave. With that thought, Jean Pinger quietly left the place and flew back to where she came from. But she had not flown far when her body suddenly shook. On the path where she came from, the place where the Blackwater mystical viper passed by, was a mess, but for some reason, there was a patch of vine's flower bed that was actually undamaged. And in the area of this flower bed, under the sunlight, there seemed to be faint dark red light quietly flashing, arranged messily, but upon closer inspection, there seemed to be some mystery. Jean Pinger frowned slightly and looked carefully for a moment. A glint suddenly flashed at her eyes. As if she had seen through something, she quickly looked around and at the same time sneered and quietly said, "Even they are here." She hesitated for a moment in the air and eventually still shook her head and flew off without looking back. And in front of the Celestial Emperor Treasury, the Blackwater mystical viper's rage was still incessant, hitting the stone door with all its might. The good faction people in the sky initially wanted to secretly go down to check if they could save Lu Sweki and Fanxian, but once they got close, they would be attacked by the Blackwater mystical viper, and a few times they were almost injured by the enormous beast. After encountering danger for a few more times, Xiong signaled the others to retreat further away, gathered together, and then said in a low voice, "This is not the way to go on. We don't know what exactly is in this treasure trove to make this beast so obsessed with it. With it guarding here, no matter what, we will not be able to enter the treasury." Lin Jingyu's face was grim, staring intently at the Blackwater mystical viper below. Zheng Shushu also looked anxious, but even though he was quick-witted and intelligent, right now there was nothing he could do. Just when everyone was extremely anxious, only the Blackwater mystical viper's crazy roars seemed to be left in the world. And at this moment, suddenly, the sky darkened. Zheng Shushu and the rest were startled. Just a moment ago, the sky was still clear for miles. How could it change in an instant? They could not help but looked up. With this look, they were dumbstruck. In the sky above, a large patch of orange-yellow color suddenly appeared, several zhongs in circumference, shrouding above their heads and actually blocked out the sunlight. Following which, a clear cry like a phoenix's cry was heard from the horizon. The Blackwater mystical viper, which was still in a frenzy, suddenly stopped its movements. Its enormous snake head raised its head to look, and then it made an angry gesture, opened its mouth, bared its fangs, and roared at that patch of cloud. That patch of cloud covered the sky and sun as it descended. Although it did not look as huge as the Blackwater mystical viper, but it was almost the same size. From afar, the crowd could clearly see that it was a huge orange-yellow feathered bird, spreading its wings and flying, circling in the sky, facing the Blackwater mystical viper, which was entrenched on the tree trunk. Not only did it not show any fear, instead it seemed to have the intention to attack. And the Blackwater mystical viper facing the strange bird also put away its insufferably arrogant attitude, coiled its body, its snake head hissed, solemnly waiting. This must be the legendary Nine Heavens spiritual bird, the yellow bird. Note 1. Xiong looked at the two huge beasts confronting each other, muttered. Note 1. This passage was taken from Classic of Mountains and Seas, Great Southern Classic, Mount Wu, Yellow Bird. Where there's Mount Wu, there is Yellow Bird in the west. Emperor Medicine, 8 temples. Yellow Bird in Mount Wu presides over this mysterious snake. Another note, Emperor refers to Celestial Emperor, Medicine refers to Celestial Medicine, namely immortal medicine. Mysterious Snake refers to the Blackwater mystical viper. Chapter 198. In the darkness, he slowly opened his eyes. The surroundings were dark. Then, not far in front of him, a faint light slowly lit up, like a weak candle flame in the night, quietly burning. He silently looked over there. That ray of light was a light purple, then it turned green, and then it slowly turned dark green. Like this, it kept changing, flickering with all kinds of colors. It was very beautiful. Ji, suddenly, beside him, Xiao Hui's low voice was heard, as if because it was in the darkness, even its voice did not dare to be too loud. Ghostly turned his head, as expected against that faint light. He saw the monkey, Xiao Hui, crouching beside him. He smiled, subconsciously clenched his teeth, wanted to endure the pain and sit up first, to take a clear look at the surroundings before doing anything. Unexpectedly, when he turned over and sat up, it was extremely smooth. There was not the slightest pain in his body. He sat up smoothly. Instead, it surprised him. In the darkness, that constantly changing color light gently shone on his body. Ghostly looked at his body. The injuries from the Blackwater mystical viper's heavy collision, for some reason, suddenly unbelievably recovered. He frowned slightly. In his heart was really surprised, but for the moment he could not think of any reason. He wanted to stand up and take a good look at the surroundings first. Thinking of this, his body had just moved. Suddenly, he stopped. His body seemed to suddenly stiffen. He didn't know when it started, but there was another hand in his hand, a fair, slender, and gentle hand. Their grip was so tight, so natural, that it made one forget that their hands were still holding together. Ghostly was stunned, and then slowly looked to the side. The faint light, gently floating in the darkness, reflected that cold, beautiful face. Ainan's eyes were still closed, her face still pale. At the corner of her mouth, there seemed to be a faint trace of blood, like a strange red flower petal, landed on that snow-like fair face. Her lips slightly pursed, as if still carrying a faint smile. A stretch of silence, whose eyes, quietly staring in the darkness, time like water, 10 years of time, deeply engraved in life, but also like everything had never happened, like it was yesterday. Boom! Suddenly, a loud sound exploded in this dark space. Immediately, the earth shook and the mountains swayed. In the distance, there seemed to be a clear cry of a phoenix and a furious roar. The entire dark space shook violently. Xiao Hui gave a strange cry. Its body turned into a rolling gourd, stumbled to the side, and with a plop fell onto the ground. Ghostly was also unable to sit properly and leaned to the side. And this force shook Lu Sueki's body. As if she suddenly woke up, she let out a soft cry. As her body tilted, she opened her eyes. The first thing that entered his eyes was darkness. Then he saw a familiar face sitting beside him. Just like 10 years ago at the bottom of the forsaken abyss, at the heartless sea, the tremors slowly subsided, and the surroundings gradually returned to normal. Who knew what was going on with this violent tremor? Lu Sueki slowly sat up and looked at Ghostly. Ghostly did not avoid her gaze and looked back at her. A moment later, they lowered their gazes. Their hands were still tightly clasped together. Lu Sueki did not speak, his body did not move. Ghostly's lips moved a little, and then he slowly released his hand and retracted it. Lu Sueki indifferently looked at that hand, which retracted back into the darkness. That hand which just a moment ago was still emitting a faint warmth. In her eyes, a faint sorrow suddenly appeared, and then it disappeared, and she resumed her calmness. She stood up, and at the same time, her brows slightly frowned. It seemed like she was also surprised by the sudden recovery of her injuries. She looked around and quietly said, "What is this place?" Ghostly also slowly stood up and said, "I'm also not sure, but I remember that we flew into the Celestial Emperor Treasury." Lu Sueki was silent for a moment and said, "Was it you who saved me?" Ghostly glanced at her and then indifferently said, "No, it was your luck that you flew in before the stone door closed." Lu Sueki turned her head and expressionlessly looked at him. A pair of eyes, which were still bright in the darkness, seemed to be glowing. Ghostly did not look at her eyes, turned his head away, and started to walk towards that faint light. At the same time, he said, "You do not owe me anything. If you want to kill me, just do it." Lu Sueki quietly stood in the darkness behind him, stood there for a long time, and then gently patted the dust off her body and tidied up her appearance. Gigi. Xiao Hui, who was dizzy from the fall just now recovered and leapt over. In a few leaps, it scurried up to Ghost Li's shoulder and crouched on his shoulder, looked towards that flickering, mysterious light. As it got nearer, the things reflected in their eyes also became clearer. This was a wooden platform erected in the darkness, about half a person's height, a circular wooden pillar about the thickness of a baby's arm connected to the ground. At the top, there was a small platform about 1 chi in size. In the middle of the platform, there was an ancient cup that seemed to be made of wood. Upon closer inspection, one could see that the entire wooden platform and the cup were completely connected to each other, as if they were one with the underground trees. But the most attractive thing was the thing in this small wooden cup. The wooden cup was about 3 CUN tall, 2 CUN wide. In the middle was a transparent liquid, and floating above that liquid, there was a small transparent stone with 5 flat sides, sparkling and translucent. And from this stone, a gentle light was emitted, forming a semicircular light screen on the small wooden platform, refracting various colors of light, spreading out in all directions. Right now, Lu Sueki had already walked over, stood beside Ghost Li, and looked at that wooden cup. In the air, a strange fragrance floated faintly, pervading everywhere, making one's spirit roused when one smelled it. Ghost Li and Lu Sueki were not ordinary people, but right now, they could not tell what exactly it was. Actually, on this wooden platform in the Celestial Emperor Treasury, what was contained in the cup was the legendary celestial medicine from the Celestial Emperor's secret treasure. This wooden platform and wooden cup were connected as one with this unique tree. Using this unique tree's 10,000 years of spiritual energy, to preserve the elixir. And outside the Celestial Emperor treasury, to be able to make the Blackwater mystical viper this kind of ancient demonic beast rule over it so much that it did not hesitate to confront its natural enemy, the yellow bird that guarded the elixirs. It was precisely this cup of elixir that looked unremarkable. And ghostly and Lou Swecky's injuries suddenly mysteriously recovered was actually related to this elixir and this treasury. Just that this kind of legendary secret news, today most people did not know, Ghostly and Lou Swecky did not know, facing this kind of treasure, they only frowned in puzzlement. While pondering, suddenly another loud sound was heard. The entire Celestial Emperor treasury shook violently. At the same time the Blackwater mystical viper's terrifying roars were heard again. It seemed like this ancient demonic beast was extremely enraged and still refused to abandon the elixir. Although the Celestial Emperor treasury was an ancient wondrous place, but right now, firstly, it had been a long time. Secondly, it was unknown how many times the Blackwater mystical viper had rammed into it. This level of ancient demonic beast power, how could it be ordinary? If it was not the Celestial Emperor treasury, if it was an ordinary small hill, most likely it would have been razed to the ground by the Blackwater mystical viper. Right now, cracking sounds were heard all around. Everywhere reverberated with the sounds of hard trees groaning in pain, the twisting sounds that made one's heart jump. At the same time, the treasury shook violently. Xiao Hui screamed and almost fell down from Ghostly's shoulder again, while Ghostly and Anin felt the earth shaking around them, almost losing their footing. Logically speaking, under this kind of violent impact, even if it was the entire wooden table and wooden cup, the elixir in the cup would also be spilled out. But just as the wooden cup was shaking violently, the stone floating on the surface of the water suddenly emitted a thin golden light. It shot straight up and shone on the light screen. Immediately, the entire light screen was dyed gold. Then, the light suddenly grew brighter. Under the illumination of this light screen, the wooden table, which seemed ready to move in the violent shaking, suddenly quietened down, until the surrounding shaking gradually calmed down. That golden light then slowly weakened and returned to its original state. Ghostly and Lou Swecky looked at each other, their eyes filled with astonishment and admiration. This kind of uncanny workmanship was really unimaginable. Ghostly looked around again. Borrowing the light from this strange stone, he saw that other than this wooden table, there seemed to be nothing else in this treasury. But looking at this stone, it was crystal clear, immortal energy lingering in it. It was definitely not an ordinary item. It seemed like the rare treasure that he had been searching for so many days was this item. Once he thought of this, his heart warmed. He stretched out his hand to touch that wooden table's light screen. "Don't you touch it!" Suddenly, Lou Swecky's voice, suddenly turned cold, rang out beside him. Ghostly's hand stopped in midair and then slowly retracted, turned around, and faced Lou Swecky. Both of them stood face to face. The distance was less than 3 chi, but the indistinct warmth between them, right now suddenly turned cold, replaced by the coldness behind the silence. Ghostly looked at Lou Swecky, unhurriedly said, "I want this thing." Lou Swecky looked at that man's eyes, quietly said, "I will not let you get it, unless you kill me first." Ghostly did not speak. That faint light in the darkness gently swirled, changing into 7 colors, as if narrating something. Rumble. Another deafening sound. Similarly, the earth quaked and the mountain swayed, but this time the scale was even greater than before, although that strange stone emitted golden light to protect the wooden platform, but the surrounding walls of the Celestial Emperor treasury seemed to be unable to hold on anymore. Following a hoarse, snapping sound, above their heads, a huge piece of wood suddenly fell. Ghostly and Lou Swecky jumped away at the same time, following which the deafening sounds continued incessantly. The Blackwater mystical viper outside seemed to have gone into a frenzy, unceasingly striking the Celestial Emperor treasury. At the same time, the clear cry of the phoenix and the roar also became more and more enraged and agitated. Outside, an earth-shattering battle seemed to be going on. The entire Celestial Emperor treasury, under the immense external pressure, finally started to slowly deform. The walls on all sides started to slowly cave in. The broken pieces of wood started to fall like rain. Under such circumstances, Ghostly and Lou Swecky temporarily only cared about avoiding the falling huge pieces of wood, and for the moment, could not be bothered with the wooden table. It looked like this celestial emperor treasury was about to collapse, but at this moment, as if it was the power of the ancient deities, that strange stone suddenly emitted a much thicker and more dazzling golden light, abruptly turned into a pillar and shot up to the sky. And this time, it broke through that light screen that enveloped the wooden table and shone directly on the celestial emperor treasury's dome. In the treasury, a mysterious and distant voice suddenly sounded, like the mysterious Sanskrit chanting in Mount Lingshan, and also like the soft murmurs of the 9 netherworld's lonely souls. Following that golden light pillar pressing against the dome, the entire celestial emperor treasury seemed to receive some kind of strong support and stopped caving in. The falling pieces would also gradually stopped. Then, in Lu Sweki and Ghost Lee's line of sight, on the entire celestial emperor treasury dome, in that dazzling golden light, suddenly, that mysterious voice sounded, as if it was chanting something, golden characters the size of a doe. Under the illumination of the golden light, one after another appeared in the air. Heaven and earth heartless, treating all living things as straw dogs. Ghost Lee's body shook greatly. After a moment, those 9 words slowly disappeared, but that mysterious chanting voice instead became louder and louder, more and more vigorous. In an instant, that dazzling golden light pillar suddenly like an explosion, blazing hot shot towards the entire celestial emperor treasury. On the surrounding walls, under the illumination of the golden light, one after another golden characters appeared in the air. The strokes were bold and vigorous, as if they were flying, circling around Ghost Lee and Lu Sweki, in the rumbling, flying in circles. Ghost Lee and Lu Sweki were awed by this breathtaking strange scene, but following that they were attracted by the surrounding mysterious characters, they looked on hungrily, forgetting everything around them. And Ghost Lee's heart was beating faster and faster. At this moment, there seemed to be a voice shouting loudly in his heart, Tian Shu. Tian Shu. This is the 3rd volume of Tian Shu. Outside the celestial emperor treasury, Fa Xiang and the rest hid far away in the sky. Watching the battle between the 2 ancient beasts on that strange tree, their faces involuntarily turned pale. The huge tree trunk, which was originally exuberant with vitality, lush foliage, and surrounded by innumerable vines and flowers, right now it seemed to have suffered a once-in-a-million-years calamity. Everywhere were broken branches and withered flowers, a tragic state. And in front of the tree trunk, outside the celestial emperor treasury, the black-watered mystical viper coiled tightly around the celestial emperor treasury stone door. Its enormous snake head roared towards the sky. The divine beast yellow bird flapped its wings and flew. Every time it flapped its wings, a gust of gale would blow up. Even Fa Xiang and the rest who were watching from afar could feel the strong wind. The yellow bird was covered in orange-yellow feathers. Both of its wings spread out to almost 100 zhang, sharp beak and eyes. Its claws were also huge and sharp. Right now it kept on swooping down, using its sharp beak and huge claws to attack the Blackwater mystical viper. And the Blackwater mystical viper's mouth kept on spitting out poisonous gas. Its snake head swayed, its fangs sharp, counterattacking with all its might, and occasionally struck the celestial emperor treasury below it. Chapter 199. This divine bird and enormous serpent fought each other until the sky turned dark. The wind and clouds changed color. Luckily, it was in this desolate and uninhabited place. If not with these 2 ancient beast powers, no matter how prosperous the place was, it would also be destroyed by them. Fighting till now, the tyrannical Blackwater mystical viper was already riddled with wounds. On its gigantic body, which was originally like a demon god, lines after lines of huge wounds were vividly visible. Dark red blood kept flowing out, staining the tree trunk below it dark red. An ancient demonic beast like it, its body was originally as hard as stone. Only the yellow bird's sharp claws and sharp beak could hurt it. But although the Blackwater mystical viper was severely injured, but the yellow bird itself was not doing well. Its originally bright and beautiful phoenix-like feathers, right now in the battle with the Blackwater mystical viper, was bitten several times by the Blackwater mystical viper. Countless fell off. Its body also had several wounds. Deep to the bones, blood gushed out, staining the area around its chest red. Right now, the 2 enormous beasts temporarily stopped their attacks. The Blackwater mystical viper entrenched above the celestial emperor treasury. The yellow bird landed on the nearby tree trunk, both sides facing each other. The black snake roared. The yellow bird cried out, as if demonstrating their might. Neither seemed to have any intention of retreating. But from the outside, the black water mystical viper seemed to be in a disadvantageous situation. After all, the terrain was not good. Hanging alone high up in the sky, it could only entangle tightly on the tree trunk, and the yellow bird could flap its wings and fly, continuously attacking from all directions, gaining the upper hand. In addition, the yellow bird was the black water mystical viper, this kind of demonic beast's natural nemesis, towards the black water mystical viper's venom. It naturally had the ability to resist, although it was still wary, but after being bitten, it was unable to injure its core and was not fatal. One of the black water mystical viper's most powerful abilities basically lost its effect in front of this yellow bird. In addition to the disadvantageous terrain, it seemed to be aware of this point and became even more enraged. The huge eyes stared wide. Suddenly the snake head turned around. While the yellow bird was still at a distance away, it ferociously charged towards the celestial emperor treasury. The yellow bird was enraged with a clear phoenix cry, once again flapped its wings, and rose up. But this strike was the accumulation of the black water mystical viper's entire strength, crashing down with a loud bang. Not to mention other things, just the huge tree trunk below, it was already shaking violently. On the celestial emperor treasury, cracks were instantly all over. Even that huge stone door had a few cracks from this strike. It was as if, after persistently resisting the black water mystical viper's terrible power for countless times, right now, the mysterious power in the celestial emperor treasury finally started to crumble. In the distance, Fa Xiang and the rest looked at each other and gasped. The yellow bird let out a shrill cry, flew to the air, suddenly swooped down. Its sharp beak was like a huge arrow leaving the bow, shooting towards the black water mystical viper. In an instant, the sky changed color and the wind and clouds changed color. There seemed to be an intense gale forming a huge vortex that looked like a tornado. The yellow bird was in a violent whirlwind as it charged down. The black water mystical viper roared loudly. Its huge snake eyes suddenly shot out endless ferocious glint and ferocious expression. It actually disregarded the yellow bird's attack in the sky, and once again used its huge snake head to smash into the celestial emperor treasury. Boom! In that instant, sand and stones flew, dust swirled up, a tearing sound reverberated through heaven and earth. Finally, after a loud sound, the celestial emperor treasury's dome wall collapsed with a loud crash, forcefully smashed open by the black water mystical viper's unparalleled power. Almost at the same time, the yellow bird swooped down furiously. The tornado instantly enveloped the black water mystical viper. The crowd only heard the black water mystical viper making a deafening roar. The sound was extremely mournful and shrill, as if it had suffered some great damage. The gale was extremely violent. Fa Xiang and the rest were like ants drifting with the wind and had no choice but to retreat further. After the dust settled, the roar did not lessen at all. The crowd looked over and saw on the black water mystical viper's head, blood flowed profusely. The right snake eye spurted out like a fountain. One of its eyes was actually pecked blind by the yellow bird. And at this moment, in the celestial emperor treasury which was struck open, the golden light slowly flickered and then gradually dimmed. The black water mystical viper and the yellow bird could not be bothered with the battle and looked down at the same time. In front of these two enormous beasts, even the enormous celestial emperor treasury seemed like a child's toy. In the flying dust, in the celestial emperor treasury, two figures staggered up. It was Ghost Li and Lu Sueki. And Xiao Hui, who had been crouching on Ghost Li's shoulder, right now fell down from his shoulder and hid under that wooden platform, using its hands to grab tightly onto the wooden pillar, stabilized its body. Presumably with the black water mystical viper's reckless attack, the situation in the celestial emperor treasury must not have been very good. Looking at Ghost Li and Lu Sueki, although their faces were slightly pale, but they were still considered calm, Xiao Hui, on the other hand, was so frightened that it turned ghastly pale, its mouth zzz, calling out nonstop. Ghost Li calmed down, and then his body shook. On both sides there was an unimaginably huge beast, glaring like a tiger at its prey, and looking at them. They were all seething with murderous intent. Without thinking, he knew this place was not a good place to be. But without waiting for him to react, the black water mystical viper's remaining snake, I had already seen that wooden platform in the Celestial Emperor treasury and that transparent liquid in the wooden cup on the wooden platform. Immediately, the black water mystical viper's eyes shot out in uncontrollable greed. Its huge snake head suddenly charged down, and the yellow bird would not just stand by and watch. With a clear cry, its sharp beak also pecked down. These two enormous beasts, at the same time, unleashed their might. No matter how high Ghostly and Lu Swecky's skills were, they could only instinctively control their magical weapons and swiftly fly away. But Ghostly had just flown up. Suddenly his body shook, and at the same time, a sound was heard from behind. Xiao Hui, who had been crouching on his shoulder, was now hiding under the wooden platform and did not follow up. Although his character had changed greatly from the past, but he still had deep feelings for Xiao Hui. Without even thinking, he wanted to turn back to fetch Xiao Hui again. Unexpectedly, he had just paused. The yellow bird's sharp cry, together with the black water mystical viper, both of its wings flapped. A gust of violent wind surged over and actually pushed Ghostly and Lu Swecky far away. Ghostly was greatly anxious, but the force of the yellow bird's flap was extremely strong. His body involuntarily flew far away. With great difficulty, he managed to control his body. He was already more than several zhans away from the tree trunk. Both of his brows tightly frowned. The clear light below him flourished and immediately flew back. Right now, the battle between the yellow bird and the black water mystical viper was nearing its climax. The black water mystical viper's target was clear. It wanted to snatch that small cup of elixir, but the yellow bird naturally would not allow it to touch it. Therefore, it did not fly up anymore and stayed on the tree trunk. The two enormous beasts surrounded the small wooden cup, biting and pecking here and there, roaring repeatedly, but for the moment under the other party's power enveloping them. They were unable to lower their heads to reach the elixir. Xiao Hui hid under the wooden platform. Initially, it was still a little afraid, but gradually it realized those two huge fellows were only fighting with all their might above it and did not come down. So it quietly peeked its head out to watch. Just that with this look, it saw that the light screen that enveloped the wooden cup, along with the collapse of the Celestial Emperor treasury, also disappeared. Xiao Hui slowly climbed up to the wooden platform, raised its head and looked up. In the air, the snake head and the bird head were pecking here and there, fighting intensely. Occasionally, huge scales and feathers fell down like rain. The monkey scratched its head and blinked its eyes. It lowered its head and saw that in the wooden cup beside it, the liquid was like water, reflecting its image. There was a stone floating on the surface of the water, but it didn't sink. It was sparkling and translucent, and no one knew what it was. It glanced at that wooden cup a few times, suddenly crouched on top, stretched its head into the cup, and started to gulp. Gulu, 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 gulu. The black water mystical viper and the yellow bird who were fighting to the death just now, the two enormous beasts who were still fighting with earth-shattering intensity, suddenly both of their bodies seemed to have frozen. Gulu, 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 this tiny little sound, in the innumerable terrifying deafening noises, was not even worth mentioning, but for some reason, suddenly, the entire heaven and earth stopped, leaving only this comical monkey drinking sound. That cup was very small. The liquid it contained was only about half a cup. The monkey Xiao Hui very quickly finished it and then raised its head and looked around. In the air, the black water mystical viper looked down and seemed to have not reacted, and then raised its head and looked at its nemesis, the yellow bird. And the yellow bird also looked at Xiao Hui almost exactly the same, and then looked at the black water mystical viper. TSK, TSK. Suddenly, another strange sound was heard. The black water mystical viper and yellow bird looked down at the same time. Xiao Hui stuck out its tongue and licked twice, following which the monkey head shook. Obviously, the taste of the water in the cup was not very good. Far from the delicacies that his master cooked in the kitchen at Qingyun Hill Big Bamboo Valley, Xiao Hui was very dissatisfied. At this moment, its monkey eyes turned. Although the water in the cup was finished, there was still a small bright stone quietly lying in the wooden cup. It simply picked it up and then lightly threw it into the air, opened its mouth, like a human eating a peanut, with a gulp, swallowed it. Far away, Fa Xiang and the rest were sweating profusely. Suddenly, a roar was heard, a sharp whistle. The black water mystical viper and yellow bird charged down at the same time. The snake head and bird beak, together smashed towards this pitiful little monkey. Xiao Hui turned pale with fright. Even the monkey hair on its head stood up in fright, but right now, there was nowhere to escape. It could only instinctively lay down on the wooden platform, using both its hands to hug its head. Seeing that Xiao Hui was about to die under the combined attack of the two enormous beasts, at this critical moment, a clear light flashed past. It was Ghostly who had rushed over with all his might, stretched out his hand to pick up Xiao Hui, and flew away with all his might. They had just left the wooden platform when they heard a deafening sound behind them. The entire Celestial Emperor Treasury Building turned into ashes. The Blackwater mystical viper howled loudly on the tree trunk, but although it was invincible on land, it was helpless against an enemy that could fly. After howling for half a day, in addition, the elixir was already lost, and with its natural enemy here, it finally turned around angrily and slowly climbed down the huge tree very quickly, disappearing into the mist. But Ghostly and Xiao Hui's danger had not disappeared. The Blackwater mystical viper could not do anything, but there was still the mythical yellow bird that had been unhindered for 80,000 miles in the nine heavens. Right now, flapping its wings, refused to give up and pursued closely. Ghostly's forehead was covered in sweat. This yellow bird's flying speed was extremely fast, but firstly because of the intense battle with the Blackwater mystical viper, it was riddled with injuries and its physical strength was greatly depleted. Secondly, Ghostly was small and agile. He kept making sharp turns in the air, and so the yellow bird did not catch up. But even so, the yellow bird's exhausted body gradually caught up. It looked like it was not far away and was about to be caught up by the yellow bird. Xiao Hui, who was in Ghostly's embrace, screamed loudly, looked very anxious, and only called out twice, and suddenly made a sound. Not knowing if it was full from drinking or something, at this moment, it burped. Ghostly felt angry and funny at the same time. He did not know whether to laugh or cry, but right now, he could not care so much, and could only try his best to avoid that swift and fierce sound of the wind behind him. While flying, from the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a flower bed ahead. It was different from the surrounding mess. The flowers were still luxuriant, and among them, there was a faint red light. His body shook. In that instant, he could already tell what exactly was hidden there. He did not expect them to also come here, but why did they not tell him? He was puzzled, but right now it was after all a matter of life and death. He did not have time to think too much and immediately flew over there. The yellow bird followed closely. Far away, Lu Sweki and the rest exclaimed. The yellow bird's sharp claws were about to reach Ghostly's back. Looking at the yellow bird's furious expression, it would not rest until it tore these people who stole the Celestial Emperor elixirs into pieces. In the blink of an eye, Ghostly used all his strength, turned into a dark green light, like lightning, flew past that patch of flower beds, and the yellow bird did not notice anything else, followed closely and flew above the flower beds. A strange change occurred. Under the flowers, suddenly the red light exploded, connected as one. Above the sky, a red ancient cauldron appeared. It was Ghost King Sek's treasure, hidden dragon cauldron. And the person standing on top of the cauldron, his face calm, his mouth chanting, it was Ghost King. The mysterious incantation once again reverberated. At the same time, Qing Long, Yuji also appeared beside the flower bed, both hands waving continuously. Instantly, under the hidden dragon cauldron's mysterious and unfathomable spiritual power, the entrapped dragon watchtower formation was activated again. The red light swept up, connected as one, forming a dark red light screen, converging on the hidden dragon cauldron in the sky, trapping the yellow bird within. How could the yellow bird wait to be captured? Immediately dashed left and right, but not knowing if it was because it had used up too much of its strength in the battle with the Blackwater mystical viper, or this entrapped dragon watchtower's power was too strong. It actually hit a wall a few times, and no matter what it tried, it could not charge out. Instead, it was repelled by the mysterious force. Its injuries looked even more serious. In the end, as if it knew it was helpless, the yellow bird wailed, stopped in the red light screen, and did not move anymore. Ghost King gave a long laugh and landed. Ghostly also unhurriedly carried Xiao Hui and landed beside him. Right now, Qing Long, Yuji, also stood over. Ghostly frowned, looked at Ghost King. Ghost King instead smiled, waved his hand and said, "The matter's here, we will talk about it later." Speaking, his eyes gazed afar, looked at Fa Xiang, Lu Sweki and the rest, suddenly smiled and said to Ghostly, "You tell us, how are we going to deal with these few people?" Ghostly's body shook, although Ghost King's smile was amiable, but in his eyes a glint flashed. Indistinctly, there was a trace of coldness within. The surroundings suddenly quietened down again. Chapter 200. Death Marsh at the top of the giant tree. Anan, Fa Xiong, Lin Jingyu, and Zheng Shu, the four of them, unhurriedly landed on the messy giant tree trunk. The surroundings were filled with cracks, countless broken branches. Even after a long time, it still made one aghast at the battle between the two ancient giant beasts. But right now, their attention was clearly more concentrated on the few people in front of them. Fa Xiong frowned slightly, pondered, and did not speak. These few people in front of them, during the battle between Qing Yun Hill and Isi Lubo Hill. He had seen them before. Obviously, they were Ghost King's sect head Ghost King and his two capable subordinates Qing Long, Yu Ji, in addition to Ghostly, who was no longer who he was in the past. It could be said that their strength far surpassed their side. Unfortunately, after climbing up the tree, at that fork, they split up with Qing Yun's sect Xiao Yikai, Funxiang Valley Li Sun, Yan Hong, and the rest. If not, although they might not be able to defeat these four people, but they would still have the strength to fight. But thinking like that, Ghost King's sect side did not seem to have the intention to make a move immediately. Ghost King glanced over and indifferently asked Ghostly, "You tell us, how are we going to deal with these few people?" Ghostly did not answer immediately, instead looked at Ghost King. Ghost King looked amiable, seemingly peaceful, but his eyes indistinctly flashed with a sharp glint. After a moment, he indifferently said, "Since sect head you are here, naturally all matters will be decided by sect head." Qing Long, who was standing beside, frowned slightly. The black veil on Yuji's face also seemed to gently sway. Looked at Ghostly. Ghost King's expression did not change. A trace of smile still hung on his lips. He unhurriedly said, "That day when you came to this death marsh, I've already said that everything here will be decided by you. Me, Qing Long, and Yu Ji came here is only to capture this yellow bird. These four good faction people is still your call. Whatever you want, it will be done." Hey! Suddenly, an extremely disdainful snort was heard from ahead. Everyone looked forward and saw that it was Bei Bei with a frosty expression. He said coldly, "Demons of the evil path, if you have the guts, come up and fight to the death. Why are you standing there like a woman gossiping? Ridiculous." Once he said it, Qing Long's expression darkened first. Instead, Ghost King looked at Lin Jingyu from afar, did not get angry, instead smiled, turned to Ghostly and said, "This person is Lin Jingyu, right? That childhood friend of yours?" Ghostly was shocked. Until now, Lin Jingyu's reputation was not that great, but for some reason, Ghost King could recognize him at one glance. He looked at Ghost King's slight smile. His heart suddenly turned cold. Ghost King looked at him, indifferently said, "Tell me, what should I do?" Ghostly met his gaze, looked back calmly, said, "Most of the matters here have been completed. These people are not important characters. Don't bother about them. Sect Master, you should first take care of the yellow bird. That is the top priority." The Ghost King looked at him and did not speak. For a moment, there was silence. A trace of worry flashed past Qing Long's eyes. Yu Ji, who was beside him because of her black veil, her expression could not be seen, but it seemed that she was not at ease. Yu Ji's eyes passed through the veil, glanced at Ghostly and Ghost King, and then glanced afar, suddenly was stunned. Among the four good faction people, Anan stood quietly at the back, her face cold, but her eyes were looking at Ghostly from afar. Under that frosty face, there seemed to be an unknown faint concern. Yu Ji suddenly stretched out her hand and quietly pushed Qing Long. Qing Long was feeling worried, suddenly felt something, and turned to look at Yu Ji. Yu Ji's black veil swayed slightly, moved towards Ghost King's direction. He and Yu Ji were part of the four holy envoys of Ghost King's sect. How would he not know what she was thinking? Just that right now his heart was filled with misgivings. After pondering for a while, Qing Long eventually still quietly walked behind Ghost King, quietly said, "Sect Master, what Ghostly said is not without reason. Now that the yellow bird has been subdued, we better settle it down first before talking, if not inside the death marsh. He want two sects people will be there. Any delay would cause unforeseen events." Ghost King turned and looked at Qing Long, slowly nodded and said, "What you said is right." Then his eyes glimmered indistinctly, said to Ghostly, "Since it is so, I will leave this place to you." Ghostly quietly nodded and said, "Don't worry." Ghost King looked at him again, suddenly smiled, and turned to leave. Azure Dragon, who was behind him, smiled at Ghostly and followed. Yuji unhurriedly walked up. When she passed by Ghostly, Ghostly looked at her and nodded slightly. Yuji's black veil swayed slightly, but she did not say anything and just walked past. After Ghost King and the rest disappeared, Ghostly slowly turned and looked at Fa Xiong and the rest. Fa Xiong coughed once, stepped forward and said, "Zhang Jr. brother." Ghostly coldly said, "I am called Ghostly." Fa Xiong paused. Lin Jingyu, who was behind him, frowned and said in a deep voice, "Xiao Fan, why must you be like this? I know you are kind-hearted. Just that you were harmed by a scoundrel, that's why you strayed into the evil way." Fa Xiong heard till here, felt it was harsh, but he only smiled bitterly and did not make a sound. Lin Jingyu was heard saying, "As long as you are willing to turn back, I believe with Daoxian sect head's magnanimity, he will definitely allow you to return to Qingyun again." Ghostly indifferently said, "Why should I turn back?" Lin Jingyu's body shook, his eyes stared intently at this childhood friend in front of him. He was heard standing there, using an indescribable coldness, said, "Heaven and earth are heartless, treating all living things as straw dogs. I am well on this path. I don't need you all to come and save me." Lu Sueki, who was standing at the back, her body also seemed to tremble slightly. Zheng Shushu stood beside her, saw her expression, frowned slightly, but did not speak. Lin Jingyu's face was filled with anger, stepped forward and was about to say something, but was stopped by Fa Xiong. Fa Xiong looked at Lin Jingyu, gently shook his head at him, quietly said, "He has gone deep into the evil way. You must not be too hasty, or else it will have the opposite effect." Lin Jingyu had initially stopped Fa Xiong, his face full of anger, but after hearing his soft words, he finally knew that it was as he said. He turned and looked at Ghostly, his heart softened, thinking of the times when the two of them played together. Eventually, he still clenched his teeth and retreated. Fa Xiong pondered for a moment, spoke to Ghostly, "Ghostly patron, no matter if you admit it or not, we still have a history. Now that the Celestial Emperor treasury has been destroyed, it seems that there are no more exceptional treasures, but let's part ways here." Ghostly snorted, glanced at him, and then looked at the others, looked at Lin Jingyu, looked at Zheng Shushu, and finally his eyes landed on Lu Sueki's face. That cold lady stood at the back, her face like frost, her eyes like water, so deep that one could not see the bottom. Not knowing what exactly was she thinking in the depths of her heart? Ghostly looked away, without a word, turned and walked away. Not long after, he faintly heard someone chasing up from behind. Ghostly frowned, turned around, and was surprised. It was indeed Zheng Shushu who had caught up. Looking at Fa Xiong and the rest's expressions, they seemed to be stunned too. Zheng Shushu ran to him, his back facing Fa Xiong and the rest, stared at Ghostly for a moment, suddenly laughed out, said, "You won't kill me, right?" Ghostly looked at him, looked at his smile. It seemed like there was no change from when they met at Qingyun Hill Tongtian Peak, still that cheerful. After a moment, his gaze finally eased up, but his voice was still as calm as still water, said, "What is it?" Zheng Shushu made two sounds, shrugged his shoulders and said, "Anyway, I still treat you as a friend. As for what you think, I can't do anything about it." At this point, he paused for a moment. Suddenly, he blinked a few times and said in a low voice, "Big brother, can you let me hug this three-eyed monkey?" Ghostly was startled. The scene of Zheng Shushu pestering him, for Xiao Hui suddenly appeared in his heart. An inexplicable warmth rose in his heart. Actually, he grew up at Qingyun Hill. Every grass and every tree in Qingyun Hill Big Bamboo Peak. He had deep feelings, not to mention Zheng Shushu, who was one of his few friends. Zheng Shushu saw Ghostly did not speak, but did not seem to have any disdain to object. He felt happy. His mind had always been extremely intelligent. Regarding Ghostly, this friend who had entered the evil way, his heart also placed great importance on him. Just that he knew Zhang Xiaofan's character, persevering and stubborn. For a promise made in the past, he would rather die to protect it. One could imagine how serious the injury he suffered that year was. Therefore, these years, In order to pull this good friend away from the evil way, Zung did not know how many ways he had secretly thought of. In the end, he could only come up with one conclusion. It was better not to rush. Right now, his eyes landed on Xiao Hui, who was lying on Ghost Li's shoulder. Immediately, his eyes brightened. He smiled and said, "Xiao Hui, it is me. Do you still recognize me?" Xiao Hui lay lazily on his shoulder. For some reason, its monkey face was flushed red, looked like a drunk person. After Zheng Shushu called out a few times, it then weakly opened its eyes, glanced at Zheng Shushu, impatiently called out twice, and closed its eyes again. Zheng Shushu was not angry at all. Looking at him, he seemed to like it very much. The words drooling were clearly written on his forehead. Ghostly looked at him. Zheng Shushu's expression did not seem to have any change for the past 10 years. Suddenly sighed, said, "Forget it. It is also tired today. If we are fated to meet again in the future, we will talk about it then." Zheng Shushu reluctantly looked at Xiao Hui, nodded his head, then his eyes moved to Ghost Li's face. Ghost Li indifferently said, "In the future, if the good and evil stand against each other, you and I will face each other. Feel free to strike." As for, he looked up at Zheng Shushu, after a long while, slowly said, "You and I are on different paths. We will definitely be enemies, but in my heart, I still see you as a friend." Zheng Shushu was overjoyed, smiled widely, nodded his head vigorously, stretched out his hand, and was about to pat Ghost Li's shoulder, but suddenly felt it was inappropriate and retracted it. Then his eyes rolled. As if he suddenly thought of something, a snicker appeared on his lips. He took out something from his bosom. It was a rather old book with a blue cover. There were no words on the cover. Not knowing what kind of book it was, Ghostly frowned. For some reason, this book seemed familiar, but for the moment he could not recall where he had seen it before. Zheng Shushu quietly stuffed the book into Ghost Li's hands, softly laughed, and said, "We are all brothers, meeting for the first time in 10 years. This is a small gift for you." Ghostly looked at Zheng Shushu's expression. His smile was 70% happy, but also 30% inexplicably wretched, frowned, and looked at the book in his hands, casually flipped it open. Even with Ghost Li's composure, his body still trembled and quickly closed the book. The things in the book were many words and pictures. In the pictures were all naked men and women. 10 years ago, when they were still young on Tongtian Peak, Zheng Shushu wanted to use it to exchange for Xiao Hui's erotic book. Chapter 201. You? Ghostly was speechless, unable to speak. Zheng Shushu glared at him, said, "If you do not wish for both of our reputations to be ruined, then don't speak so loudly." Ghostly stared at him, an inexplicable confusion in his heart. He should have felt that this person was really mischievous, but for some reason, this seemingly senseless and uninteresting action suddenly made him feel much closer to Zheng Shushu. The times of the past seemed to have returned again. Zheng Shushu smiled at him, turned, and walked back. His quick-wittedness in a moment of desperation actually had a deep meaning. To pull this friend back from the evil way, he must first let him acknowledge him as a friend. Now that he had risked being ridiculed by everyone to do this senseless thing, Ghostly was indeed speechless. Most likely in the future, when they meet again, their relationship would definitely be much better than now. Thinking of this, a smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Xiong waited for him to walk back, smiled at him, and said, "Zheng's senior brother, what made you so happy?" Zheng Shushu was in a good mood, made a face at Xiong, and said, "Buddha said, cannot say, cannot say." Xiong smiled and glanced at Ghostly. That person was standing there, holding a thick blue book in his hand. His expression seemed complicated, not knowing what he was thinking. He shook his head and spoke to the others. "The matter here is settled. Let's go too. If there is anything, we will talk about it later." Zheng Shushu was the first to nod. Then Lin Jingyu and Lu Sueki also silently nodded in agreement. The four of them turned into four brilliant lights, rose to the sky, circled once in the air, and then left. Ghostly stood on the huge tree trunk, suddenly felt an emptiness in his heart, as if he had lost something. His gaze then landed on the book in his hand, and then he raised his hand, Looked like he was about to throw the book out, but suddenly he gave a bitter laugh and finally kept the book back into his bosom. Then he breathed deeply and then let out a long breath, pulled himself together and said, "Xiao Hui, let's go out." Xiao Hui this time did not even open its eyes, indistinctly called out twice, "ZZ, ZZ." Not sure if it was considered a reply. Ghostly smiled, waved his right hand, controlled the soul devourer magical treasure, turned into a green light, flew away like lightning, and left the giant tree. Like riding on the clouds, passing through the miasma, Ghostly flew in the air above the death marsh. Coming out from the inner marsh, slightly identified the direction in the air, and then flew towards where the Ghost King's sect men were stationed in the outer marsh. His flying speed was naturally extremely fast, but the death marsh was really huge. After flying for less than an hour, all he could see was a vast sea of grass, a stretch of emerald green. Although he did not know how many death traps there were below, but looking at it from the air, it was a picturesque scene, making one feel refreshed. Just when they were about to reach where the Ghost King's sect people were, Ghostly suddenly frowned. In the air, a familiar smell of blood drifted faintly, dispersed with the wind. Ghostly's expression changed. With a light whistle, the green light under his feet grew brighter, and he rushed down from the sky. The sharp green light descended from the sky, bringing with it an intense gust of wind, flew past the green grass and pond. The invisible wind blew the sea of grass to the sides. On the water surface, waves of ripples were formed. Very soon, Ghostly saw where the Ghost King's sect people were gathered, saw that many people were still gathered there. It seemed that at least most of them were still safe and sound. Then he was half relieved. At this moment, the Ghost King's sect disciples also noticed Ghostly descending from the sky, and one by one stood up. Ghostly landed and stood on the ground, but his first reaction was to frown even tighter. The smell of blood here was actually extremely strong. Seemed like the smell of blood that he had smelled earlier was emitted from here. The group of Ghost King's sect disciples beside all lowered their heads and stood solemnly. Although Ghostly did not kill indiscriminately these few years, but he cultivated an evil way. His temperament changed greatly. His body would uncontrollably emit a cold and callous aura. In Ghost King's sect, other than the sect head Ghost King, the other person whom the ordinary disciples respected the most was instead him, this rising star. At this moment, a person walked out from the crowd. It was a young man, sharp eyes and sword-like brows, rather handsome. It was Yanhui. He walked up and bowed to Ghostly, said, "Deputy sect head, you are back." Ghostly nodded and said, "What happened here?" Yanhui wanted to speak, but stopped, looked at Ghostly. Ghostly understood and walked forward. Yanhui looked around, loudly said, "Deputy sect head is back. Everyone stay at your posts. Don't panic." The crowd responded in unison and dispersed. Yanhui quickly caught up with Ghostly, quietly said, "Follow me." After speaking, he strode to the right side of the secluded area. After walking for a while, they came to a place where the grass was lush. The wild grass was almost half a person's height. There was no one around, but the smell of blood in the air was getting heavier. Ghostly looked at Yanhui. Yanhui's face was also slightly pale, quietly said, "Look for yourself." Speaking, he walked to that patch of grass, stretched out his hand, and pushed the wild grass aside. Ghostly slowly walked forward, looked into that patch of grass. Instantly his countenance changed greatly. This patch of grass looked no different from the surroundings, but in the middle, it was all dyed bright red with human blood. The smell of blood assaulted his nostrils, making him want to vomit. And under the thick grass, there were 13 human corpses piled up, the state of their deaths unbearable to look at. Almost every one of their bodies were broken into pieces. Even though Ghostly had been in the evil sect for these few years and was used to seeing bloodshed, but this kind of cruel methods, it was the first time he saw it. He closed his eyes, composed himself, and then his face regained its calmness, slowly walked forward, and carefully examined the corpses. Yanhui followed behind him, quietly said, "These disciples were arranged to guard here last night. This place is the furthest from where our main troops are. They're the furthest informants we have set up. These people are also quite capable." Unexpectedly in one night last night, without a sound, they were all slaughtered. Ghostly's face darkened. His eyes gradually turned cold, slowly said, "Who is the murderer?" do you have any clue? Yinhui did not answer immediately, instead said, Deputy Head, come here and take a look. Ghostly glanced at him, saw Yinhui walking deeper into the grass, stepping over these unbearable corpses. In a deeper part of the grass, there was another corpse, but this person's corpse was relatively intact. Only his left hand was missing. Ghostly's eyes twitched. He knew this person. His name was Su Chonghai, one of his highly skilled subordinates. Unexpectedly, he also died here. Yinhui walked to Su Chonghai, said, You look. Ghostly walked nearer, looked down, saw beside Su Chonghai's head, his remaining right hand scribbled 2 words on the ground. Fish, monster. That fish word was still clear, but the second monster word was already blurred. Seemed like Su Chonghai was already exhausted. Fish monster. Ghostly frowned. Yinhui nodded, said, I also don't know what this means. Don't tell me there are actually fish monsters nearby. But after discovering them today, I immediately searched the surroundings but didn't find any trace of fish monsters. Ghostly slowly turned and walked out of the grass. Yinhui followed. The unpleasant smell in the air was still very strong, but compared to the grass, it seemed much fresher. Ghostly took a deep breath, suddenly said, Where's Kill for Life Monk? Why isn't he here? Yinhui was silent for a while, said, After he saw this scene in the morning, he flew into a rage. Later on, from Su Chonghai's hand gestures, he somehow guessed that those mysterious fish monsters were heading south, so he chased after them alone. I tried to persuade him, but he didn't listen. And, halfway through his sentence, he suddenly stopped. Ghostly glanced at him, said, What is it? A trace of hatred flashed across Yinhui's face, said, Originally, Deputy Head, you had given strict orders that before you return, we cannot have any conflict with Yihuan's sect and Wandu clan, but this morning's murder, I felt most likely it was done by either Wandu clan or Yihuan's sect. So I secretly brought some people to their location, wanted to investigate if it was really done by them. Naturally, we will take revenge. Ghostly indifferently said, It happened suddenly. You're not wrong. Then after you went, what was the result? Yinhui hesitated for a while, said, This was greatly out of my expectation. Wandu clan's men, for some unknown reason, had all retreated out of the death marsh the day before, and Yihuan's sect. He looked at Ghostly, quietly said, It seemed like the same thing happened to us. More than 20 people died. Ghostly's countenance changed slightly, said, There is such a thing? Yinhui said, Yes, I personally investigated and then came back. Ghostly did not speak, stood there, seemed to be deep in thought. Yinhui did not dare to disturb, but after a long time, Ghostly still did not speak, could not help but softly said, Deputy Head, what should we do now? Ghostly did not directly answer him. Instead, as if he suddenly thought of something, turned and looked at him, said, Before I returned, did Ghost King's sect head come here? Yinhui's countenance changed, and then nodded, said yes. A faint glint flashed across Ghostly's eyes, said, What did he say? Yinhui said, Sect head came with Qing Long and Zhu Ke, the 2 holy envoys. He came to the vicinity to take a look at the situation. His expression was very ugly, but in the end he only said, All the matters here will be handled by Deputy Head, and then left with the 2 holy envoys. Ghostly was expressionless. Another period of silence. Yinhui naturally still did not know about the subtle relationship between Ghost King and Ghostly, and could only watch him from the side. After a while, Ghostly nodded and said, You have handled this matter very well. Now that the Death Marsh matter has come to an end, from now onwards, immediately bring your subordinates and leave this place. Turn back to Majestic Fox Mountain. Yinhui nodded and said, Then Deputy Head, what about you? Ghostly turned his head, looked at the white clouds in the horizon. That place looked spotlessly white and flawless. Who would have thought that under it? There would be so many bloody things happening. He indifferently said, Kill the living monk, although a little rash, but his tracking skills are unique. These fish monsters are of unknown origin and also killed my subordinates. Naturally, I have to investigate further. Yinhui lowered his head behind, said, Yes. Ghostly nodded and said, You go. After speaking, his eyes gradually looked towards the south. The sea of grass there was vast. The wind blew past the death marsh, not knowing what secrets were hidden there. Unexpectedly, in his mind, suddenly appeared a few days ago when he, Jean Pinger and Qin Weiyan were secretly meeting that mysterious fish-headed strange person who suddenly attacked Xiaohuan. Chapter 202. The wind rustled. The ancient path bleak extended forward alone. Tanis Ka and his granddaughter Tani had already left the Death Marsh, traveled east for 3 days. Today the sun was right in the middle of the day. They were still walking on the ancient path, just that the flat wilderness on both sides of the ancient path had been gradually replaced by hills and jungles. Tanis Ka glanced ahead, saw a dilapidated stone pavilion not far ahead. He felt tired from walking, turned, and said to Tani, "Let's go take a rest." Xiaohuan nodded and looked back. Her eyes were full of smiles as she said, "Elder Taoist, let's go sit together." Wild Dog Taoist, who had been following behind them, smiled and nodded. Originally, after Wild Dog Taoist left the Death Marsh, for some reason, he followed Tanis Ka and Tani from afar, made Tanis Ka feel uneasy. But a few days ago, after suddenly meeting that middle-aged man who called himself Wanren Wang, Xiaohuan exchanged a few words with him, and their relationship became a little closer. These few days, they got much closer and directly followed behind them. Tanis Ka walked to the pavilion, saw Wild Dog Taoist also followed Tani in. He was not as courteous to Wild Dog as Tani, rolled his eyes, suddenly said in a strange tone, "I say, Wild Dog Taoist, why are you always following the two of us? We are all poor wretches. There is nothing for you to rob." Wild Dog Taoist glared at Tanis Ka, retorted, "Smelly old man, pretending to be poor again, don't think I don't know there is something strange in that bamboo pole of yours." Tanis Ka and Tani were stunned. Tanis Ka immediately jumped up as if his buttocks were on fire, his face flushed red, angrily said, "Good fellow, I already knew you are not a good person, so you are really coveting my money." Wild Dog Taoist rolled his eyes at him. Before he spoke, Tani beside him also said with slight surprise, "Priest, how did you know?" Once Tani spoke, Wild Dog Taoist, for some reason, suddenly quieted down, hesitated for a moment, embarrassedly said to Tani, "Every day the bamboo pole never leaves his hand. Even when he sleeps, he hugs it in his arms. That's not all, but every once in a while, he couldn't help but touch the bamboo pole." Looking at him like this, even an idiot would know that there's something wrong with that bamboo pole. Xiaohuan burst out laughing. Tanis Ka's old face turned red, snorted and turned his head away, suddenly felt that this was too embarrassing, turned back and angrily said to Wild Dog Taoist, "Even if there's a problem with my bamboo pole, it is not up to you to care. Tell me, why are you following us?" Wild Dog Taoist was stunned for a moment, speechless for a moment. Tanis Ka immediately became complacent. A smile appeared on his face. He pointed at Wild Dog and said, "Ha, don't think I don't know. You little guy, you're drooling over my property and my Xiaohuan's beauty. You are always scheming." "Grandfather," Xiaohuan's face was red, loudly called out to Zhou Yixian. Zhou Yixian then realized that his words were not right, but his old face could not be pulled down, stammered, "Say, is it?" Wild Dog Taoist secretly glanced at Xiaohuan, saw that the young lady's fair skin, right now blushing, slightly bashful but her bright eyes like stars, sparkling, a sense of youthful beauty really hit him in the face. Wild Dog suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of inferiority, lowered his head. Xiaohuan glared at her grandfather Tanis Ka. Since young she roamed the world with Tanis Ka, experienced and knowledgeable, naturally more open than ordinary girls. Right now she turned and said to Wild Dog Taoist, "Priest, don't listen to my grandfather's nonsense. A dog's mouth can't spit ivory." Tanis Ka was enraged, said, "You dare to scold grandfather as a dog? Obviously that guy is Wild Dog." Xiaohuan stuck out her tongue, made a face at Wild Dog. A sound rang in Wild Dog's mind. He only felt that his eyes were filled with this beautiful face, could not tolerate any other colors. He also did not care about Zhou Yixian's sarcasm. Tanis Ka grumpily turned his head, said to Wild Dog, "Hey, you still haven't said why you want to follow us. If you can give a good reason, I will let you follow. If you can't, I will let you know my power." Wild Dog slowly retracted his gaze, was silent for a long time, said, "I also don't know." "Huh." Tanis Ka laughed loudly, his face full of disdain. Xiaohuan instead looked at Wild Dog Taoist. said with interest, "Priest, what's wrong? Don't tell me you have no home to return to?" Wild Dog bitterly laughed, said, "You are right." For some reason, right now he seemed to be especially willing to speak in front of this girl. Once the conversation started, he inexplicably continued, "I look strange since young. After I was born, my parents treated me as a monster and threw me into the wilderness, left me to fend for myself." Xiao Huan covered her mouth with her hand, shocked. Tanizka instead rolled his eyes, a look of disbelief. Wild Dog Taoist continued, "Then I was found by a group of wild dogs. They did not finish them. Instead, they brought food to feed me. So after I became sensible, I've been calling myself Wild Dog." Tanizka sneered again, but Xiao Huan was focused, nodded slightly. Wild Dog Taoist ignored Tanizka, smiled to Xiao Huan, and said, "So I have no home since young. If I must say, the dog kennel is my home. Then a predecessor of Bloodforger Hall met me by chance, in a moment of pity, took me in and taught me Tao. From then on, I treated Bloodforger Hall as my home." Tanizka sneered, "Then you should go back to Bloodforger Hall. Why are you still loitering outside all day?" Wild Dog Taoist lowered his head, his face gloomy, after a long while said, "Bloodforger Hall has already been destroyed by Ghost King's sect. The one leading them is that ghostly you have met before." "What?" Tanizka and Xiao Huan were shocked at the same time. The evil sect's internal strife was fierce and cruel, but they did not announce it to the outside world. So Tanizka and the rest did not know about Ghost King's sect annexing Bloodforger Hall. But shocked at the same time, both of their reactions were different. Tanizka frowned, seemed to think of something. After a long while he shook his head and sighed, said, "What a pity, when Elder Blackheart was still here, Bloodforger Hall was so powerful." Sigh. Xiao Huan did not think so much, but after the shock, she thought of something, said, "Is it that Ghostly brought people to destroy all of you? Then why are you still following him?" The corner of Wild Dog Taoist's mouth twitched. He slowly narrated what had happened. Xiao Huan heard, snorted, said to Tanizka, "Nian leader and those people, they really have no backbone." Tanizka stared at her, said, "You are so young. What do you know about backbone? If it is a life and death situation, that backbone is not something everyone has." Xiao Huan's mouth twitched, said, "Then this Wild Dog Taoist would rather die than surrender?" Tanizka glanced at Wild Dog, nodded his head, and said, "I did not know that you actually have such backbone. Not simple. But these few years, that ghostly is known as Shui Gongzi, killed innumerable people. Why did he let you off?" Wild Dog Taoist shook his head, said, "I also do not know." Tanizka did not speak. His eyes seemed to be in deep thought. His usual cheeky face instead gradually disappeared. Wild Dog Taoist saw Tanizka suddenly revealing such an expression, very different from his usual self. Couldn't help but was startled, but at the same time, Xiao Huan spoke, attracted his attention. Xiao Huan glanced at him, quietly said, "Then you follow him all day. Don't you feel uncomfortable? He destroyed Bloodforger Hall, which had treated you with great kindness. You must hate him very much, right?" Wild Dog was at a loss, after which he was silent. After a long while he slowly shook his head, blankly said, "I also do not know. Originally I hated that person to the core, but these days I slowly thought, actually, what is the use of blaming him? Even if it was not him, not Ghost King sect, Wandu clan and Hehuan sect would still do the same thing. Ghost King sect is just one step ahead." "Huh?" Xiao Huan did not speak. Tanizka instead first made a sound of surprise, reassessed Wild Dog Taoist from head to toe, looking at him in a new light. "You can actually think of this. I have underestimated you." Wild Dog Taoist rolled his eyes at Tanizka, clearly not interested in Tanizka's praise. Tanizka was snubbed. He laughed, actually not angry. Wild Dog Taoist glanced at Xiao Huan, saw her bright eyes like water. The ripples in her eyes seemed to be flowing, really captivating. For some reason, he did not dare to look anymore. Lowered his head and said, "That day after coming out from the Death Marsh, I was extremely vexed, staying with that group of Ghost King sect people. Especially occasionally I would see Nian Leader and the rest. Just happened to see you all. I also don't know why. Followed you all." He suddenly seemed to have thought of something, quickly raised his head, said to Xiao Huan, but I definitely do not have any intention of harming you all. I myself also don't know why. Probably just casually strolling. If you're not willing, I will leave now. Xiao Huan smiled and said, doesn't matter, I don't mind. Then you can follow us from now on. Anyway, the world is so big. I think you have nowhere to go. Tanizka was shocked, pulled Xiao Huan over, and said in a low voice, stupid girl, why did you randomly make this guy follow us? Xiao Huan rolled her eyes at her grandpa, said, what this guy and that guy? He has a name. Besides, he has no evil intentions, just following us for a stroll. What is there to be afraid of? Tanizka angrily said, you this girl don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. He is a notorious person in the evil sect. Heard that in the past he. Tanizka suddenly stopped. Xiao Huan stared at him and said, what about him in the past? Tell me, what heinous crimes have you heard of him doing before? Tanizka scratched his head, thought for a long time, embarrassedly said, seems like I didn't hear what he did. Xiao Huan burst out laughing, was about to turn around. Tanizka pulled Xiao Huan, said, but it is not good for you to let this person follow us. Why do you want to do this? Xiao Huan lightly said, seems like last night when we passed by the barren hill, a wild boar came out from the roadside. Grandpa, you were hiding far away. It was this priest who rushed up and chased the wild boar away, or else a weak girl like me would have to face a big wild boar alone. Tanizka blushed, said, I am old and weak. How can I stop a big wild boar? Besides, are you a weak girl? Not to mention a wild boar. Even if a tiger came, you will still. Xiao Huan suddenly coughed. Tanizka did not continue. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.